stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Welcome to today's meeting of the Housing Committee. Members of the public may like to follow @London Assembly on social media and use the hashtag London Housing for this meeting. Please may I remind participants to silence your devices. Our main theme of business today is implementing and monitoring the Renters' Right Act in London. Before we begin, we have a few short items of business. Can I now ask our clerk, Diane Richards, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chair. No apologies have been received today. However, in accordance with Standing Order 2.4D, with permission from the Chair, Assembly members Moema and Cooper are joining the meeting remotely today.
Great, thank you. So on to item 2, direct declarations of interest. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interests to declare? Great. Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of November and the 17th of December 2025 to be signed by me as correct records? And can I ask the committee to note the outstanding actions arising from its previous meeting and any additional correspondence received? Great. So that brings us to our main item of business, implementing and monitoring the Renters' Rights Act in London. And I'm really interested to get into this. Can I please welcome our first panel of guests? So we've got Niamh Evans, a Policy Officer, Renters Reform Coalition, Ben Toomey, Chief Executive, Generation Rent, Paul Williams, National Organiser at Acorn, and Alva Gottby, Members Solidarity Organiser at the London Renters Union. So I'm going to kick us off with some questions, and then members might come in with follow-ups, and then we've got just, some few questions to get through. We may not go to all of you for every question just because of time, but you will get the opportunity to send anything further in writing. So the first set of questions from me is around changes for renters under the Renters' Rights Act. So the lead question is, what will be the most consequential changes for private renters in London due to the measures introduced by the Renters' Rights Act? I might go with Niamh and then go down the line. Thanks.
So the Renters' Rights Act is the most significant improvement to renters' protections in more than a generation. At the heart of this is the banning of Section 21 evictions, or no fault or no reason evictions. This will hugely empower renters, not just through providing security for them and removing the fear of being evicted at any time at the whim of a landlord, but it will also empower them through lessening the fear that they have that if they ask for something such as a repair, that they might be evicted as a retaliation. This change particularly stands to impact renters in London. London accounts for 6 of the 10 local authority areas that have the highest rates of landlord possessions. The rest of the Act bans a number of unfair practices that landlords commonly carry out. So this includes rent in advance, rental bidding wars, which 1 in 4 renters in London currently have to participate in to access a property. It also bans discrimination against families and also people who are receiving benefits. Longer term, the Act will add other measures in that will the government can introduce to improve landlord accountability and improve housing standards. So in order that we anticipate those to come in, there's a database of private landlords, a private rented sector ombudsman, a OABS law for the private rented sector, as well as decent home standard for the private rented sector as well.
Amazing. That was very comprehensive, and appreciate if we can add, if you've got any more kind of depth or anything additional to add, or any shortcomings as well that people could pick up on.
That's great, thank you. To add to that very comprehensive answer from Niamh, it's going to give us more rights, greater security, safer homes, and a fairer shot at putting down roots and staying in our communities as renters. So, taken as a whole, that package is one of the most impactful ways in which the government, and if enforced properly and proper awareness raising is done at the local level, is one of the most impactful ways in which you can actually reach into people's homes and genuinely change their lives and improve their lives for the better. One of the things I'd add is about that enforcement, which I know we'll get onto, is that we've already seen there's some tricks afoot. Those that can get away with not abiding by the law or even the spirit of the law will do so. And so we've seen, for example, statements of intent, not necessarily in London, but where letting agents have asked people to agree to a statement of intent to stay in a property for 12 months, even though the law is doing away with fixed-term contracts. It's got no legal basis whatsoever, but it's designed to con renters into thinking that they do not have the flexibility that the law now provides. And those sort of things will happen unless local authorities can get a grip on them and there's proper enforcement in place, ideally from the earliest possible opportunity, because then it will have that deterrent effect that is so badly needed.
Thank you. Paul?
So I won't list everything in the bill because I think Neve's done a pretty comprehensive summary of that. But I think from our perspective, the two most significant things are getting rid of Section 21. It's such a damaging practice that we've seen getting worse year after year after year. Means tenants have no security, people have to move all the time, really uprooting communities, really means that lots of our members can't settle down in communities, they're constantly stressed, constantly anxious, costs tons and tons of money, thousands of pounds to move. Lots of places in London ask for 6 months rent up front. Really is life-changing to get evicted for lots of people. And also means, from our perspective as an organisation, that takes a confrontational approach to landlords and letting agents to assert our rights. Section 21 makes things a lot more difficult because if there is an issue with repairs or unfair rent increases, there's always the risk of being given a Section 21 is always a risk, which means that people are afraid to assert their rights and complain about things. People put up with all sorts of behaviour, and it means landlords and letting agents can just bully people as well using Section 21. The other significant thing is the improvement in enforcement standards. Enforcement across the country and in London is significantly lacking. Landlords get away with all sorts of awful behaviour, which is why housing is in such poor standards. Increased powers for councils is significant, and that will be something really, really useful for us in terms of what we can put pressure on councils doing to take on landlords that aren't meeting the standards and renting out poor quality homes. In terms of the shortcomings, a few key things for us. I think with regard to enforcement standards, the decent home standard, I think that's scheduled for 10 years? 2035, which is ridiculous. What's the point of that? There'll be a new government and then is that ever going to happen? The government's just kicked that into the long grass and let future governments deal with that. Also, in terms of enforcement, something that we'll come on to later, but we'll be very concerned with local authorities across London being able to deal with that at the moment. There's huge problems with how enforcement is carried out across the city, and unless there is a strategy from City Hall and increased funding for local government, we'll be very concerned with that. But the key thing that's missing from the bill is addressing affordability. There's supposed to be improvements to the tribunal system, which is better than what it is at the moment, but it still doesn't address the issue of affordability. So what we want to see next is plans for rent controls and scrap right to buy and improved plans for increasing the stock of social housing across the city as well.
Thank you. Alva?
Yes, well, I can only agree what's already been said. Just a few things to add. I think a lot of how effective this bill will be, or the Act now will be for renters will lie in how it actually plays out in practice. And that will depend on how the court system will deal with things like the new grounds for evictions, but also, as Paul just mentioned, how local authorities are able to deal with increased powers for enforcement. So that's obviously something that we will just have to see how effective it actually is. And similarly to Paul, London Renters Union welcomes the changes to the first-year tribunals and the changes to how tenants can challenge unfair and above-market rent increases. However, that form of sort of challenging rent increases puts all of the onus on tenants themselves. So that will also be something that we will have to see how it plays out, because more vulnerable tenants, tenants who don't have the experience of going to tribunal, will naturally be hesitant to use that system if they don't know how it works. So that's also something that we are sort of looking at, how it will actually play out and what information and support tenants are given to actually use that system to challenge rent increases.
Thank you. Alva, just to follow up there, have you got anything to say about the potential impact of conversion of the fixed-term assured tenancies to periodic tenants? Can you talk a bit about that dynamic?
Sure, yes. I mean, it's a change that I think will be very important for tenants. And I think this is also a bit of a sort of a culture shift that needs to happen, I think. And that means that there's a lot of work to do in terms of how this Act is implemented and in terms of, as I said, what information tenants have about their new rights. And so I think the move to assured tenancies is significant, but that will only sort of work if the majority of tenants understand what that means in practice and what rights they have and what they can do if the landlords tell them to leave. At the moment, we see a lot of tenants who will just receive an email from the landlord and say, "Oh, well, I have to leave now." And also, I think in terms of the new grounds for evictions, if the landlord wants to sell, I think some tenants, but also in terms of like how the court system works, will just take it for granted that if the landlord wants to sell, and it's hard to know what to say about that or how to argue against it. So, and similarly with the other grounds, and if the landlord says they want to move in, how will you be able to prove that they're actually using that grounds correctly or not? So I think that will be one of the interesting things for us to see, and one of the things that we want to monitor closely is how those are actually play out in practice.
Great, that's really helpful. And just a final one from me before I move on to colleagues. Ben and Paul, is there anything you wanted to comment on? I know you touched on the decent home standard coming in kind of 9 years, but just anything else on the impact of housing conditions or Awaab's law? Was there anything you wanted to briefly touch on? And then I'll go on to colleagues. Ben, you look like you were keen to come in.
Yeah, housing conditions is a big part of this, and there's ways in which it's going to improve from the 1st of May. It's already been mentioned about the end of Section 21. No-fault evictions will empower tenants to be able to challenge poor conditions, assert their rights, stop their landlord dragging their feet so much, because you're not as at risk of being kicked out in retaliation for that. That's a good thing, but there's still that risk, which is going to keep coming up, I think, of being priced out of your home instead. So you're still concerned that you may get a rent hike that's unaffordable if you are still asserting those rights. So people will still have a nervousness in terms of the power dynamic in their homes. In terms of the decent home standard and Awaab's law, 10 years is way too long to bring it in, and it brings in the uncertainty of not knowing if there will be a government that's still wanting to pursue that by the time you reach that point. Awaab's law is such a simple law built on such a awful tragedy based on the toddler Awaab Ishak, who was sadly died from prolonged exposure to mould in their home. And all it does is introduce timescales in which the landlord needs to deal with those issues. The landlord already needs to deal with those issues. That is the law. They're supposed to deal with hazards, particularly Category 1 hazards, which mould and damp are. Those are hazards that will, with prolonged exposure, cause harm to health, cause sickness, or even hospitalisation or death in the sad case of Awaab. And so that law already exists. It's just about asserting a timescale in which it's reasonable for the landlord to have to respond to that. There is no reason to wait 10 years just to say that you need to do that within a certain reasonable amount of time. So to bring Awaab's law forward, ideally into this year, would be perfect. But the decent home standard as well, where it does require changes to homes, it's only those homes that aren't already decent that we're bringing up to standard. And again, when people are paying more than a third of their wages to a landlord for their home on average, in London it can be up to more than 50% for key workers even, having to pay so much, then you'd expect a certain standard that means that your home isn't going to be making you sick.
Assemblymember Lord Bailey with a question.
Chair, is this the point to just... I want to ask Paul a question. Paul, you talked about rent controls. What system are you suggesting? Because rent controls worldwide have been a bit of a disaster normally for supply and maintenance. So how would you draw the balance between controlling rent but allowing people to make enough so they can upkeep the property? Or
I would argue that they haven't been a disaster everywhere. We used to have much more formal mechanisms to challenge rent increases here, and they seem to work quite well before they were got rid of in the Housing Act, which Ben or Niamh might be more knowledgeable on this than me. In terms of kind of what our policies are, it's still a new policy field here. It's still, I think, what we're trying to do at the moment is win the argument that it's needed. We don't really have a clear policy suggesting what they should be. I know that in other places they have it. Rent controls are, I think devolved power seems like the simplest way, I think, for London as well. I think it's something that the Mayor has supported, asking for devolved powers for rent
You're not
controls.
alone, Paul. He has no idea of what kind of rent controls he's asking for either. I don't ask to cause trouble. I just ask because I think rent control sounds great. People will tell you it's work, but most economists will tell you it doesn't. So I'm always interested in what and how. Ben, maybe you have a comment on what and how.
Yeah, I don't think it's been a disaster worldwide. I think that's why it still exists in many countries across Europe and in North America, for example. What rent controls does, it's regulating the amount of rent that you can pay. So the big win available is the fact that the majority of people that are living under a rent-regulated area, so that could be London, would no longer have rent rises that would be, the kinds that we've seen where we've averaged, upwards of 12%, for example, in recent years, even finding rent rises that are over 30% or 50% at times is completely unregulated at the moment. So to have that advantage has been weighed against other things. So some things that you might lose if you have, depending on what type of rent control system you have, is that people might not move around quite as often. That's a good thing in most cases. You want to be able to move out, of course, if the place isn't what you set out for, it's not the right standards, or you need to move for work, let's say. But to give context to that, we, as renters in the UK, we're moving every 3 years on average. In Germany, they're moving every 11 years as renters. The stability and the sense of community and the ability to stay in your home is massively impacted by how much rent.
I understand it, Ben, and again, I do think that largely people talk about rent controls being an utter disaster, but that's not the point. The point I'm asking for is, where would your rent controls be? You may not have an answer, and I want to be very clear, sure. The Mayor doesn't have an answer either, so it's not simple, but where do you draw the line? Is it RPI plus 1? Is it, what is that line? Because where I do agree, we've seen, I'd argue, maybe levels of greed, steep rent rises way beyond what's reasonable, way beyond. But I am also worried that rent controls will lead to a lower supply. And when people make international comparisons, we are not like any other city because our history is different. Simple as that. So they're not as useful as they seem. So what's the system? You may not have an answer, and it might be something we need to consider. But
I do have an answer for you. Our position is that it's the lower of wage growth or CPI inflation, because that's what actually is impacting people's pockets. Right. So if you're trying to bring down the cost of living crisis and the cost of renting, which is kind of outpaced the wider cost of living, that's an important way to do it. If I can just quickly add 2 more points to that. One is that we are different to every other city, and we're different because we're the most expensive city to live in Europe now. A large part of that is because of unregulated rents that have really impacted people. The second point I'd make is around the fact that when you're thinking about the costs that hit people in their pocket and the moving of money in the city from renters to landlords, is effectively a wealth transfer from those that have the least wealth to those that have the most. So you are breeding inequality in the city, and there's a whole load of problems that come with that. The common sense protection of a rent cap actually stops people from being priced out their homes, saves local authorities money because it reduces the temporary accommodation bill, and potentially the massive shame that we have as a city where we've got more than 90,000 children living in temporary accommodation could be impacted by the combination of this Renters' Rights Act stopping the no reason evictions happening, and a rent cap that stops people from being priced out their homes. You need to do those things hand in hand. You need to build social housing. There's lots to it, but bringing in a rent cap is just a common sense way in which you can actually stop people from being forced out of their homes.
Thank you for your answer, Ben. And Paul, I really appreciate that. I still think the biggest single failing is, as a society, the Mayor and the like haven't built enough social homes. But there you go.
I think they'll agree with that too. I think, I'm going to go to Assembly Member Moema online for a question.
Thanks, and good morning to all of you. My follow-up question is just, we've talked quite broadly about the changes, and I do agree it's going to be really consequential. But I wanted to have reflections specifically on cohorts of renters that are impacted differently by changes potentially, and what are the benefits and potential issues they may face. So I'm thinking mainly of older tenants, so those who are on a fixed income or approaching a fixed income, and those with families who obviously need something, need a home which they can kind of raise their families for a good chunk of time. And then finally, just your views on local authorities' kind of use of discharge into the private rented sector, what the impact of this act will be on them.
Just for the first one, is there someone that wants to pick that one up specifically, just because of time? If someone wants to pick up the one on different groups of renters, is there someone specifically? Niamh, great. And then we'll pick up the local authority one. But that might be covered later, Sam, in one of the questions. But yeah, or the one, yeah, all three. But Niamh.
In terms of different groups of renters, such as families with children, older tenants, those on a fixed income, the changes broadly stand to benefit them. The move to open-ended tenancies rather than fixed term encourages stability in a tenancy and encourages people to be in tenancies for longer. That could work out well for people who have families, and especially when they don't have the threat of a Section 21 no-fault eviction hanging over them all the time. Same for older renters who may not want to move about as much. And it may be, especially as well, for people on fixed incomes who don't want to face the cost of moving, which is very expensive. So that the stability and security that the Act brings will be hugely beneficial for all those groups.
Sam, did you want to follow up on that?
Just a bit about discharge into the PRS, because that's partly why we have the crisis in the first place.
Yeah. If someone wants to briefly come in on that, we will touch on some of the other kind of consequences of the Act, but did anyone want to pick up on that one? Do you want to say a bit more about what you mean, Sam, and then...
So one of the things that we've been suggested to look at is the shortcomings, and I don't know if there are any, I'm wondering, but since changes in the Housing and Planning Act around discharge into the private rented sector for local authorities are in competition with ordinary private renters for stock that's available. So what, in the panellists' opinion, might be a positive or a negative in terms of rectifying that situation? So people are being moved off the housing list and into PRS.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, I guess it's trying to stop that revolving door into temporary accommodation and then back out into the private renter sector. Social housing, again, will come up. That's not something that this Act is aimed at addressing, but you do need to keep building as much social housing as possible. And then actually part of that pipeline into temporary accommodation in the first place, one of the leading causes of homelessness has been Section 21 no-fault evictions. So ending that type of eviction and monitoring closely for where the new eviction grounds are being used and what measures might be taken to prevent their misuse or even their overuse because it's driving people into homelessness. That will all hopefully begin to stem the tide of people that are going into temporary accommodation in the first place. Won't necessarily help those people who are coming out of the temporary accommodation because that requires more homes to be built, particularly affordable and social homes.
Great.
Just a very quick point. I think this also comes down to what enforcement powers councils are actually using, and what we see is that families are being discharged into PRS accommodation that just isn't suitable for their needs. It's in poor standards, disrepair, and because the council don't have the means or the political will to deal with those problems properly, you end up with families being moved from substandard temporary accommodation sometimes into like even worse PRS properties, sometimes being moved out of their area, obviously, because we've talked about the affordability issues. So a lot of these problems are interconnected, and so I think you have to sort of deal with all of these different problems.
Can I just quickly
together.
come in? I think, sorry, Chair, I don't want to hijack this, but I think
that's fine.
My question is being misunderstood. I'm not talking about temporary accommodation. I'm talking about if there isn't the stock of permanent social housing, then a local authority, wherever they are, whatever their political stripes, will discharge their duty into a private tenancy or support somebody into that. We've had lots of visits as a committee to those sorts of organisations as well. I'm just wondering, specifically for people being moved from the housing waiting list into the PRS, not temporary accommodation, permanent, what the benefits or not are there for this bill?
We'll just take one more question on this, and then some of this might come up a bit later or in the second panel, but we'll just take one more response and then, yeah.
Just one quick thing to add on this. I think what I was going to say is that there's local authorities are often what we think part of their sort of unwillingness sometimes to use their enforcement powers is that they are also dependent on private landlords to provide both temporary accommodation and discharging their homelessness duties. So that's, I think, partly why some of them are sort of reluctant to use some of those powers, which is important to look at.
Thank you. Paul, and then Ben.
Yeah, a bit confused by the question, unless the assumption there is that there is a reduced private housing stock, if that's the point, the concern there. But I feel, yeah, in terms of how this is relevant to what we're talking about in the Renters' Rights Act, the solution here is increased social housing stock. I think the conversation around this, I don't see how is that relevant to the implications of reducing a housing waiting list. If the concern is about supply, then we need to have an improved plan for building social
I think
housing.
what Sam's getting at is when there's a private rented home available, the council are often in competition with residents to place someone in that home as they're trying to support someone into a home. So that's right, Sam, right? That's the dynamic you're talking about. So when a house becomes available, the council were trying to advocate on the behalf of the family that they're trying to get a secure home. And then you've got all the other renters who are also trying to kind of bid for that home as well. Do you think the Renters' Rights Act will do anything to change that dynamic? That's the kind of question. I think that, Sam, that's where the question, is that.
Probably not, apart from the fact that Section 21 will stop people having to move around quite so much and hopefully stop pushing people into debt, poverty and hopelessness because of the cost of moving, which will ideally reduce the number of people that might need those services. But for those tenants, they'll benefit from all of the new rights and protections that are in the private rented sector. It doesn't make private renting the best place for them for one reason only, and that's because of the fact that the rents aren't capped in the same way that they are in social housing.
Thank you. And Sam, we can come back to that with councils and representatives in the second panel, because I think this is an important question. Over to you, Assemblymember Boff.
Before I answer my question, I'd appreciate if any of the panel could write to us with examples of where rent control has worked and hasn't resulted in reducing the availability of private accommodation. I've only been asking this for about 15 years and nobody's come back with a reply, but I'm always hopeful.
We can get that for you.
I'm always hopeful. Mr. Williams, you'd already answered about, and you expressed your concerns about the capacity of local authorities to actually carry out the responsibilities that are handed down to them on the Renters' Rights Act. Is anyone else concerned about that? And perhaps also turn your attention to the capacity of the court system as well currently, because, you know, the courts aren't running terribly well at the moment. And from my perspective, I can't see that a considerable amount of resources are being allocated to be able to manage the consequences of the Writers' Reform Act. If anybody would like to come in on that. Yes, Ms. Evans.
So the Act will only be as effective as how well it is enforced, and that is our primary concern when it comes to implementation of the Renters' Rights Act. The Act does place several new obligations on local authorities to protect renters' rights and actually take enforcement action, but they currently aren't able to enforce the existing system of rights that we have. So, for example, in the 3-year period to 2024, over a third of councils didn't prosecute a single landlord. In the last 3 years, only one landlord in London was prosecuted for an illegal eviction. So clearly we have our work cut out in boosting capacity, and that is our primary concern. And we would like councils to look at various opportunities to boost their enforcement, so whether that's through on-the-spot fines and new inspection powers that are both enabled by the new Act, but also looking at some of the existing frameworks that exist, such as expanding selective licensing. 40% of London councils do not operate a single licensing, selective licensing specifically, scheme, and this could help boost their capacity and provide a stable source of funding, as well as looking at the full private rented sector stock as opposed to just large HMOs, which even in their cases, I think only 2/3 of large HMOs in London should have a mandatory licence.
Will selective licensing be necessary after the Act is in place? Because
yes,
there is a requirement in the Act to register anyway with the Ombudsman, I believe.
Yes, it's the Coalition's view that selective licensing will still remain a really important tool for councils.
In what way, bearing in mind that they have the data there, they'll have the data in front of them of who is renting in their property, renting in their area?
Because it adds a stable source of funding and a particular powers as well to help and processes to help inspect properties and look at the full range of private rented sector
They'll
housing.
already get those rights within the Rental Rights Act, won't they? So it's just a source of funding, really.
That's one of the primary
because there won't be
yes.
anything in addition to what's already been granted to them.
No, these powers are existing though, and I think there's consensus that it would continue to be helpful for councils to use this as a resource.
But it appears as though just on the
moment.
funding, because there's no additionality. Once the Renters' Rights Act is in place, there's no additional powers that selective licensing would give them. But it's a great source of money to add to the headache of landlords and just take money from landlords.
In the scheme of kind of how much landlords, the different costs that they face, it's only quite a small amount in comparison.
Well, those costs, of course, will be passed on to the tenant.
It depends on how you look at it. I mean, if we get into
got to come from somewhere.
We'd be talking. It could be something like £10 a month, maybe less. Where you look at it in a fee like that. So it depends on different.
I don't know which selective licensing.
Let Niamh just finish? If you just let her just finish the.
No, I just wondered which. But £10 a month doesn't sound realistic. I think it's considerably more than that.
It's over 5 years. Some of them are over 5 years. It's like £500 over 5 years or something.
Yes, I don't have the exact figures to hand, but it wouldn't be something that you would say would massively inflate rents. Yeah. But it would obviously be a hugely valuable resource for councils.
I mean, the court system in general, as we've established, is it fair to say it's not up to standard at the moment for dealing with what the Renters' Rights Act says the courts should be doing? Is that a fair point? I mean, nobody thinks it's fine, It's not fit for purpose at the moment, is it, the court system, to deal with the Rental Rights Act?
Anyone else?
Yes. That's really what we're trying to establish, is whether or not.
Probably, yeah, to be honest. I mean, there's chronic underfunding in all aspects of society at the moment, and all of our institutions seem to be crumbling and falling apart wherever you turn, whether that's like central government, civil service, local government, and our court system is probably the same. So not something we've looked loads into in terms of funding for the court system, but probably makes sense that there should be increased support and funding for the court system when it comes to introducing any new legislation.
Yeah. And also, of course, it's not just the tenants who will be needing that souped up court system. It will also be the landlords as well who will have to go to court more often in order to gain possession when they need to gain possession. Is that a fair point to make?
I think it depends on how they're claiming possession. So far, the experience has been over the last 30 years or so that Section 21 notice is very difficult to resist in court as a tenant. You can do it, but of course, because there's no reason needed to be given, then the tenant can just be forced out. So the backlog, if there was a delay going to court, then it would be based around the fact that there are now actual grounds to challenge, and there's a change in the eviction system. So people are potentially, if they're aware of their rights, they'll be less likely to just leave the home on the basis that the landlord has asked them to leave. And that's a good thing, because it means that they're able to assert their rights and able to stay in the home, not necessarily be forced into temporary accommodation so soon.
But do you think there's going to be more or less for the courts to do?
Probably about the same.
About the same?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. On to Assemblymember Lord Bailey.
Could there be unintended consequences for the Renters' Right Act either before or after the implementation of the Act? And what could negatively impact tenants and the private rented sector more broadly? Let me start with Ben, because obviously from one side of the argument there's the myth that all the landlords have left. You know, and is that an unintended consequence, or is that a consequence worth bearing in order to support people's rights? We've just talked about the courts. There will be more court activity, but you could argue that's correct, because you're trying to place the courts to help vulnerable people, so that might be the right thing to be an outcome. So what's some unintended consequences you think might come up, and consequences that you think are worth bearing as well?
Yeah, I think it's worth bearing in mind that the change in the system will have some judders and jolts, particularly the end of Section 21. If there are landlords that are looking to use that ground, there may be a spike in the number of Section 21s just before the 1st of May deadline comes in. That did happen in Wales at the end of 2022, building up to their ending of Section 21 in Wales. So any protections that can be given, whether it's through discretionary housing payments, crisis resilience fund, making sure that local authorities are making people aware of what are the grounds for Section 21, because it's a notice that's not necessarily always given legally. There are ways in which it wouldn't be legal. For example, if you didn't have a gas safety certificate, or if there was an improvement notice that hadn't been dealt with by the landlord. So there's things that the council and the government could do in terms of making sure that you can smooth over that transition period. And then when it comes to the selling of homes, if that does happen, if that's the reason that Section 21s are being used so that landlords can leave, if they're leaving because they don't want to provide these basic protections that are in the Renters' Rights Act, then it's good riddance to those landlords. I don't think we need those in the sector. The homes themselves don't just fall into the ground. They'll be bought by maybe another landlord, maybe a first-time buyer as well. And I think it's worth bearing in mind as well that if we had a doubling of the size of the private renters sector in the last 20 years or so, and we're talking about all of the problems now that are within that. Increasing the number of landlords hasn't solved problems for private renters. If politicians are interested in reviving home ownership, they must accept that that will involve the private renters sector getting smaller. So finding ways in which, if landlords are selling, there's an ability for renters to be able to move into home ownership is important. But again, you start talking about costs and how hard it is to save for a deposit for your own home if rents are spiralling out of control.
I mean, the other way for home ownership to increase would be to build more homes. That's probably the better way to do it. Alva, is there a potential impact on access to private rented properties for marginalised, more vulnerable tenants? Because any change in the market, it's the people at the bottom end who feel the pain of that. Could some of these changes, could some of this affect them, and could we do something to mitigate those changes?
Yes, I mean, I think there is the potential that a certain group of landlords might decide that they don't want to adhere to these new regulations, and they might do things like use license agreements for no other reasons than that they don't want to have an assured tenancy in place. And so there needs to be a strategy to deal with things like that, where landlords are intentionally trying to remove the new rights. We might also see certain groups of renters being more exposed to illegal evictions. We saw this when there was the eviction protections during the lockdowns, and evictions couldn't go through the court system that we saw as back in illegal evictions taking place. So this also comes down to how the Act is implemented and how it's enforced by local authorities. Because if local authorities don't have the means or the will to carry out that enforcement and protect the most vulnerable residents, there is a risk that this can create in certain places a sort of two-tier system where more vulnerable people, students, disabled people, people who don't speak English as a first language, are sort of pushed into a more unregulated part of the private rented sector. So I think that is something to be aware of, especially for local authorities, but also for the GLA to share best practices around enforcement, to make sure that local authorities are aware that they have duties to support tenants who are facing illegal evictions, to make sure that there are strategies around preventing landlords from using license agreements when they shouldn't do that. So
sorry, just to interrupt you. How would it be possible to identify that? Or is that just something that's going to be really tough and you'd have to rely on the tenant to sort of flag that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there will be a bit of a challenge, but I think one of the things that the Act is doing is introducing more powers for councils to investigate landlords. So it might be that they are receiving reports from tenants, and if that landlord, for example, owns multiple properties, looking into patterns of behaviours across those properties and trying to create a bit of a map. So that is work that will take up quite a lot of time. It's also, I think, skilled work, because what we're seeing is that some local authority officers don't know that much about housing law. And so we need to make sure that they have the training and the skills needed to carry out this enforcement work. But there will be a need to sort of look into how this plays out, and if certain landlords are
and hopefully it'd be, and I suppose that's where you'll call them, because you have networks. You're talking about the changes. You're amplifying best practice, not best Patrick. Niam, am I pronouncing your name correctly? Neve. Right. Are you concerned that weak enforcement could see unmanageable rent increases and this idea that some part of the market may become unregulated? Obviously, that would be illegal, but are those two things something we have to look out for, and could we mitigate against them? Because you talked about licensing. I believe my colleague is correct. The cost would be passed on, but would that cost be worthwhile if you could then regulate the market properly because you have the resources to do so?
Absolutely, we are concerned about rising criminality in the sector. There is already what you would call a shadow private rented sector, where there's a large level of crime and breaches of the current legal obligations. And there's only more scope for this to increase as there are these new protections that come in. So similar to the comments that have already been made, we're quite concerned about there being a rise in illegal evictions, which there's already really poor protections against. So absolutely essential is trying to improve the enforcement process and system to be able to not only boost the capacity to deal with complaints that do come to councils, but also to make access to justice for tenants a lot stronger as well. So we need to have processes in councils that make it easy for tenants to come forward, and that they have the confidence that they can approach a council if they are facing something like an illegal eviction, which is obviously deeply destabilising and harmful to people's mental health and financial circumstances, that they can go forward to a council and feel that they will be dealt with in a reasonable time frame, and that they will be heard.
Thank you. And maybe I'll come to Paul on this last question. You've heard what your colleagues have said around worries they have. I'm sure you have worries of your own as organisation. But what can be done to mitigate them? Because, for instance, this conversation has largely been about bad landlords. My experience of landlords is that most of them are very good and would like a long-term tenant. So is there something we can do to help landlords understand the rules, prepare for them, so not break them, so make the whole sector better? And is there something we can do to help tenants understand the new reality? There are new protections here.
That's the next
excuse me. I've just focus on the landlords then, because I'm concerned that we talk about landlords as bad. My experience is most landlords are decent people trying to do decent things. So what can we do for landlords to mitigate some of these unforeseen consequences?
Sure. I think going back to some of the broader potential and intended consequences, I think that the big glaring omission from the Renters' Rights Act is addressing affordability. Are the changes in the Renters' Act going to impact that further? Right. Maybe. I'm not going to say that they definitely are. Rents have been going up and up and up year after year after year with poor regulation anyway. It's all about power in the economy, and landlords have had a disproportionate amount to tenants. So I mean, the long-term solutions are increasing the supply, as people have said, increasing social housing stock, and also bringing in rent stabilising measures in forms of a type of rent controls. But in terms of enforcement, I think some of the issues that we're concerned about are a rise in illegal evictions. It's something that we see quite a lot of anyway, and at the moment local authorities seem completely unprepared on how to deal with illegal evictions. They seem completely unprepared on how to deal with enforcing the law as it stands. There's a lot of Neve came up with some cases statistics before. There's a huge discrepancy. Some local authorities just do not use enforcement powers ever. And illegal evictions, when I think the Mayor said that 1,000 police have been trained over the past few years as part of a new programme. When you ring the police, we've had members do this, they've rang the police when they've been illegally evicted with people coming round to the house and kick their door in. The police do not come. So it seems there's a huge gap in how that policy is. In terms of mitigating those, needs to be a better strategy from City Hall in terms of how councils are using their enforcement powers, and also a better strategy for how the police are actually policing illegal evictions as well. In terms of your question about what can we do to prepare landlords, sure, I'm sure the councils have a relationship with landlords. They can maybe do workshops, let people know. Landlords know that these changes are coming in. They've known for ages and ages. Lots of landlords are part of organisations, like renters are getting parts of organisations where they're able to access their rights. It really is their responsibility. I think something that we find a discrepancy on is our two main campaign issues at the moment have been around renters' rights, but also council tax debt, which is obviously an unrelated issue. But the disparity in how an ordinary person is treated, if you fall a couple of days behind on your council tax, you get sent liability orders and you get bailiffs sent to your house. It's your responsibility to, straight away the council are on you. If a landlord does not meet their basic legal standards, which they should know before they go into business, they do not get dealt with by the rule of the law. They get kind of a softly approach, they get informal warnings, they get taken by their word, and there's loads of landlords that play the system all the time where there's so many cases we've come across where someone's raised something with the council have said, yeah, we've resolved it. The landlord hasn't done anything, they just told the council that they've done it. And there's a real institutional bias that we find in lots of councils. I don't know if we're going to talk more about enforcement, but obviously we would want to see more funding and resources for councils, because I think they need it. They are underfunded in dealing with this situation, and particularly the new powers that they have. But what we find time and time again is the lack of political will amongst our local authorities from cabinet members, but also within the department, that there's an institutional bias towards landlords, that they believe that a informal, nice, soft touch approach to landlords is what's better, when we think that it's not. Okay. So in terms of supporting landlords, I think that the focus really should be on what we can do to support.
So, Chair, the one thing I think we need to cover at some point is letting agents as well. Yeah.
Thank you. On to Assemblymember Small-Edwards.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, panel. I'll go to Ben with my first question. To what extent do you think renters understand the new rights that they have as part of the Renters' Rights Act?
At the moment, very limited, I think. It's hard to kind of express how much the system so far has relied on lots of knowledge being with landlords that isn't necessarily passed on to tenants. Just to go back to the question earlier about fixed terms and the changing of the fixed term tenancies, there's been an assumption in the sector for a really long time that you get to the end of the fixed term and unless you negotiate something new with your landlord, you just have to leave the home. That will be a default eviction. That's not actually how the law has worked for decades, but renters have been disadvantaged by that fact because it allows the landlord to put a burning platform towards them to get them to sign something new, to get them to agree to a rent rise as well. So that's the kind of situation that we're building from. Because the first phase of the Act doesn't come in until the 1st of May, at Generation Rent we've been holding off a little bit to talk too much about the detail of what the rights will be. We don't want to confuse people to think that they'll have these rights now when it's not actually the system yet. But we are looking to build up towards Renters' Rights Awareness Week, which we host every year. And this year we've moved to the days approaching the 1st of May, where we'll be doing webinars, attending events, producing as many resources as possible for as many stakeholders and partners as possible to reach renters. And we'd love to work with councils on that. We're already discussing with the GLA about what we can do there. One thing that the Mayor and the GLA could take advantage of is the Transport for London network and the number of renters that you could reach through advertising campaigns, either on the tube, on buses, for example, to just make people aware around that time, probably building up from April, so it's not too early. And in order to do so, I'd say there should be some real emphasis on the things that tenants benefit from the most within this Act. That would include the sort of, I'd say, if you can compare the deep, meaningful change of Section 21 in terms of security, there's equally deep, meaningful changes in terms of how it just feels in your home. So the right to not be unreasonably refused a pet is going to affect an enormous number of renters, but they won't necessarily know that, and their landlord might not say, did you want to request a pet in your area? So it's about kind of choosing those ones that will get people get people's attention and then saying, actually, there's a whole raft of measures that you can look into if you follow this link or if you sign up to Generation Rent's mailing list, for example. So all of those things that we'd love to work with the GLA and the councils on. The final point I'd make is that 1st of May is within PERDA, something that most normal people might not know, but we're all very familiar with. And just trying to make sure that this isn't seen as a party political issue. This is a framework of rights that will exist. It's a fact. Landlords will be told about it through their membership bodies or through councils. We shouldn't start to think it's political just because we're talking to renters about what their rights are now. So emphasising that will be great.
Yeah, I think the promotion of the TfL network is a really brilliant idea. And yeah, we go to Alva.
Just quickly, I really agree with everything that Ben just said, but renters are it's a group with lots of different people in it who have different needs as well. And as I said earlier, some of these new rights that tenants have, such as applying to a first-tier tribunal for a rent assessment or using a rent repayment order, are rights that are sort of well-educated people who are used to using that kind of system might have much easier access to than, for example, a working-class single mum who doesn't speak English as the first language and has never encountered the tribunal system before. So there's a bit of a thing for us to think of, I think, collectively around how do we access those groups that are sort of least likely to use the new rights, but also most exposed, I think, to the sort of most exploitative and most dangerous housing conditions as well.
And that kind of prefigured one of the questions that I was going to ask is, how do we give people the confidence to go to a tribunal? Because I wouldn't want to necessarily go to a tribunal. It's not, it's inconvenient. It can be very bureaucratic. It's a bit intimidating. How do we give people that confidence to say, look, if you do go to the tribunal, if you challenge an unfair rent increase, you are going to get a fair hearing and you could potentially be successful?
Yeah, I think a lot of this is about accessing information, both information about the fact that the system exists and what the changes are. Currently, many private renters aren't using the system, both because Section 13 notices haven't been in wide use in the private renters sector, but also even when they are served, people are just aren't aware, or they're worried about rent payments being backdated. So informing renters about those changes that are being made, but also having easier access to information about what market rents are, what is the situation in your area. The evidence gathering part is perhaps the most difficult aspect for the tenants, and a lot of the information that they will sort of have access to is coming from Rightmove or that kind of services as well. So having other sources of information about what rent levels are will be useful. As well as it might be that local authorities can have a sort of dedicated service to supporting tenants, having a rent officer in their area that can support tenants who most need that support to make that application as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think definitely if councils had a named officer who would support tenants in going to tribunal, that would be a very good idea. Does anyone else have any other thoughts on promoting the measures in the Renters' Rights Act, or how we can give renters the confidence to take advantage of the powers? Yeah, Paul.
Yeah, I think I've raised some important points there. A lot of councils are not very good at this in general. Lots are better than others. There's huge discrepancy in it, but it's often quite difficult to get to speak to someone in councils. They're very bureaucratic. It's very difficult to. Lots of places might not have a phone number, or you ring it, no one answers. You've got to go through all these forms, and it's quite difficult to go to speak to someone. A lot of councils are quite difficult to just go and try and speak to someone in person as well. So I think if there was council staff that were dedicated to supporting people through tribunals, I think that would go a long way. In terms of enforcement, again, going back to there's existing powers that councils have that they just don't use. We have come across a council in London that when you complain about a landlord, it says in their kind of at the bottom before their signature, is just to let you know that we're seeing landlords evicting people as a result of their complaint. So you might want to consider whether you actually want to put forward this complaint or not, which is obviously absurd because that's putting people off putting complaints. And local councils actually already have the power to do something about this. If they issue improvement notice, it means people are protected from revenge eviction. So if there's that kind of culture within councils where they think that is an acceptable way, that just puts people off. And we know we know members that complain to councils and then get evicted as a result of it. So people just don't want to do it. So councils, one, make sure that they're up to scratch in terms of how to deal with complaints, that they're not putting tenants at risk of landlords and using their enforcement powers. And if they just promote it as well, as soon as councils start using their enforcement powers and start slapping these big fines and prosecuting landlords and putting it in the press, people will feel much more confident in raising things with their local authority. And as well, organisations like us, where one of the reasons Acorn and LRU exist is because there is this big gap that we are representing our members in the face of other our local governments not. So anything that can be done to direct resources and funding our way will improve people being empowered to assert their rights.
Thank you. Ben?
Thank you. Just two further points to that. One is that there's a database. Finally, we're going to have a database of private landlords, for the first time in England, and that's going to come online probably later this year. Touch wood. And when that happens, that could be the place where tenants are encouraged to look, but they'll only look if it's worth their while. And so on there, you want to have the kind of information that would be relevant to the tribunal. So you want to record the value of rents on that database. You want to have information that talks about rent repayment orders as well. So the kind of offences that come in this Act or already exist, where you can reclaim your rent. So if you can get that right in the database, that's something for government to think about. The other way we could look at it is that there's already a landlord licence checker run through the Mayor's office in London, and that's about there is the ability to claim back your rent if your landlord's supposed to have a licence but doesn't. If we could expand that checker to include some of the other offences that will be quite common, we think, and get as much awareness out there as possible to make sure that renters can access that, and then pursue rent repayment orders, it does two things. It benefits the tenants that have been unjustly victims of those offences, but it also acts as a deterrent straight away, knowing, who knows our homes better than ourselves. We're living in them, we're experiencing these things, but it gives that ability for tenants then to make clear that landlords can't get away with this, and as much support as you get from the Mayor or from councils on that point would be really useful.
Thank you all. Some really brilliant responses there, which I think should inform some of our recommendations. I think there's also a big piece to be done on digital comms as well when it comes to promoting the Renters' Rights Act measures. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. A quick follow-up from Assembly Member Boff.
You talked about the landlord licensing checker run by the GLA. How reliable is that?
I don't have an assessment of that with me, but I can take it away and.
Yeah, I mean, because what you won't find on there is Jazz Athwell MP, who ran a slum.
We haven't got much time, Assembly Boff.
Yeah, I'm sure, but he ran a slum. He didn't bother licensing, even though he put in his own licensing system in his local authority, and it doesn't appear. And when the Mayor is challenged. When the Mayor is challenged for Jazz Athwell to
I think
no, this is an important point, and to the point, when he is challenged to reveal the name of the managing agent of that property, he has declined, and the Mayor won't chase it up, and the local authority, Redbridge Council, won't chase it up. So once again, I ask you, how reliable is the GLA's licence checker and rogue landlords checker?
Well, I understand the way it works is that someone wouldn't appear until you're searching your postcode, and then you would be able to see, you'd check if your property requires a licence, and then that's at the point in which you would be able to challenge, but you'd have to do that as a tenant. You've raised a wider point, which is about the complete lack of enforcement, which exists across all the, pretty much all of the local authorities in London, which definitely needs to improve. I think that's done so through a wider problem actually is that you've got the licence checker and you've got various measures by the Mayor, the rogue landlord checker, that monitor the inadequate activity that's going on here. They don't really promote more activity, and what we'd like to see is the Mayor and the GLA taking a greater role in pushing local authorities to do more. Ideally, that comes with some funding. So you'd look at a legal fighting fund, for example, provided by the Mayor, or encouraging the government to do more than the 18 million new burdens funding that it's offering to the whole of England, because that's just a one-off, as I understand it. You need sustainable and predictable funding to get local authority enforcement right.
And just very quickly to Mr Williams, do you agree that London councils should introduce a citywide time limit for initial responses and home visits by local authorities, because there's no metric at the moment?
Yes. So we've been campaigning across the city for a zero-tolerance approach to landlords, bad landlords and landlords that break the law, that I think both yourself and Lord Bailey put your names to when we were last here. And what we're calling for is the enforcement powers that exist for local authorities to use them to their maximum capacity, because
absolutely.
I'm going to have to move us on just because we've got more. You've answered the question.
This tiniest yes or no. Do you think local authorities should publish those responses, their response times to complaints by tenants?
I'm not sure. It would seem like a sensible idea.
Lovely. I'm just checking on my own party's policy as it's been for the past 12 years, and it seems like we're in the right place. Thank you very much.
And I do think there is some information that we can look at as a committee around the checker, because I do think there's people's data gets taken off after a year. It depends a lot on, like you were saying, Ben, who gets referred on, and it depends on the enforcement to know where they are. So I do think that's something for us to look into. Assembly Member Moema, thank you for your patience.
It's a pleasure, Chair. So my questions to the panel are around the Mayor of London support in implementation. And I just first of all wanted to quickly ask for a clarification, if that's okay, something that Ben said. You mentioned a legal burdens fund. Can you just expand really briefly on what you mean by that?
Sorry, it was a new burdens money.
Oh, new
which is
burdens.
coming from government. So £18 million has been promised to, I think the wording was to prepare for the implementation of the Renters' Rights Act, and that will be shared among the councils, the local authorities across England.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I misheard that. Thank you very much. So my first question is to Niamh. I think it's slightly been covered by somebody else, but I would appreciate your perspective as Renters Reform Coalition's rep on the panel around how the Mayor can support renters' understanding of their rights and responsibilities.
So the Renters Reform Coalition would agree with sort of the points that have already been made around making awareness raising accessible and using different points of contact, whether that's to see the transport networks in London, etc., to raise awareness wherever possible. And we would really emphasise that just raising awareness isn't enough. We need there to be also the accessible support services and proper advice, whether that is through renters' organisations or advice charities, to be able to give meaningful support so people can actually enjoy their rights and access the justice that they need. And as part of that's reviewing sort of councils' different approaches to how they deal with incoming complaints as well, and making sure there is the wider awareness of how how tenants can seek the help that they need.
Thank you for that. Oh, I can hear an echo, sorry. Is there, do you think that the things that you've suggested are complementary to the functions and responsibilities of both local and national government? Kind of, obviously the Mayor sits somewhere in the middle there.
Yes, absolutely. We believe that the Mayor can play a vital leadership role in coordinating across all the local authorities in London, particularly in best practice sharing. We think there's best practice sharing both in enforcement but also in awareness raising as well. And we also think that the Mayor plays a vital role in potentially creating the accountability of for councils to deliver on these various aspects of implementing and promoting the Renters' Rights Act.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that. My next question is to Ailbhe and Paul. So obviously the one of the commitments that the Mayor made in the 2024 manifesto was around support for renters groups, and it would be really helpful to just, obviously there's a plethora of types of renters groups, yourselves, Acorn and London Renters Union, and other groups like London Citizens, Citizens Advice, who provide legal support. What further role do you think the Mayor has in supporting groups like yours and, you know, the others that might be more in an advice and legal support space? Maybe we'll start with Ailbhe, if that's okay.
Yes, I mean, obviously we welcome sort of direct support to renters organisations, and I think should prioritise the ones that are bigger and have wider reach, because in this instance they are more effective in terms of informing a wide range of tenants of their rights. But we also see a role for specialist organisations such as Safer Renting, who play a vital role in supporting tenants going through illegal evictions. So I think that there could be a mix of different forms of services. Tenants' needs are often complex, and different organisations do different things well. So supporting that ecology and thinking about the different functions that different organisations have will be the most helpful approach.
To add to that, yeah, agree. I think direct support, give us money, would be helpful. In terms of what the Mayor can do, meet with us. We haven't met with Mayor Khan. The closest we've got is Tom Copley, the Deputy Mayor, who we met with last year. What we would like to see from the Mayor is clear support for our campaign. zero tolerance to bad landlords, to follow his colleagues Zoe, Andrew and Lord Bailey that supported this when we met with them last year. I think from what it seems the City Hall strategy in terms of enforcement at the moment, it does seem that there is support for better enforcement in terms of what's going on in City Hall, but it seems very much that obviously Mayor is limited in what he can do over local councils, but it seems that there is more, could be an improved strategy in terms of getting local councils to actually use their enforcement powers in terms of what pressure can apply. Is there scope for naming and shaming local authorities in the way that we would want to do landlords as well? Working with us to improve how the police respond to illegal evictions. As I mentioned before, I know there's been a training programme for dealing with illegal evictions. I understand that there is some sort of policy that we could find in how the police, the Met, are supposed to deal with illegal evictions, but that's completely pointless if, when you ring 999, the police refuse to come, accuse you of wasting police time and say it's nothing to do with them, it's an illegal eviction, and then you have a situation where local authorities and the police are both pointing the finger at each other to deal with it. And we've had cases where landlords have gone round to our members' houses, beaten them up, told them if they don't leave, they'll come back and beat them up again. This was recorded. They got a caution. The local authority wouldn't do anything. The police wouldn't do anything. And he was just left with us being their only support. We also had a case where one of our members, there was an attempted illegal eviction that we managed to stop. The police wouldn't come. We managed to get members there to go and stop it ourselves. They came back the next day with a group of friends, a group of their cronies, kicked his door down and illegally evicted him from the house, and police would not come. So all of this is pointless in terms of all of these new regulations and new powers are completely pointless if landlords can just kick people's doors out, drag them out of their homes, and local authorities and police don't do anything. So the Mayor really needs to take responsibility for this, we think. In terms of what he can do as well, we would like to see him lobby harder for rent controls. I know it's something that he said he has supported, but it seems Steve Reid is not going to do this without considerable pressure in terms of his build, baby, build, which is fine, but we need increased social housing and plans to seriously take rent, affordable rents more seriously. He's not going to do that without considerable pressure. Yeah, there's other things as well that could be good situations like mystery shop agencies. That's something that maybe City Hall could do, make sure that lettings agents are complying with that. But yeah, we'd love to meet with the Mayor ourselves and put forward some ideas and develop a good working relationship with him.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you both of you for that, rather. So you talked about, Paul in particular, but I imagine others would also have this view, around funding and to meet with, do you mean your organisation specifically, or the kind of those organisations in the campaigning space, or kind of support to those tenants who are at the sharp end of the delivery of these changes? Because it would just be really helpful to have some clarity, or just kind of what would the Mayor be funding, I suppose? Because I don't know what that looks like.
I think Ben wanted to come in, Sam, just to...
If you don't mind,
Yes.
and I'll answer the last part of that question as well, which is it's not just support for renters groups in the manifesto. It's to quote, I will also back renters to defend their rights, including funding for groups such as renters' unions. If that funding hasn't been forthcoming yet, and this year is the biggest changes to renting in a generation, then I would suggest that the sooner the better for that funding to come down the track. Just the wider point I wanted to make was about the limiting of rent rises. The Mayor has been on the record for a number of years now wanting powers to be devolved to be able to limit rent rises in London. But in September last year, the Housing Minister said in Parliament that the government has not received direct representations from the Mayor in respect to rent controls, and he has not discussed their introduction at a local level. I think it's high time that the Mayor started making those representations on behalf of London, and it's something that, as he's said himself, he's needed to slam the brakes on soaring rents, but if he hasn't been asking government to do that, then it's really something that he needs to get a move on with.
Thank you, Ben. And just thoughts from Alva and Paul on the support, when forthcoming. What would that look like? What would that turn into from the kind of the funded support?
I mean, the kinds of activities that we do involve renters providing direct support to each other, and that is a way of sharing information that some tenants hold but others don't. It's a very effective way of doing it, we do a lot of direct support for our members. We have about 7,000 members in London who are a mix of social and private tenants. So it's providing that direct support on the ground. I think our membership is also representative of a sort of broad sector of tenants in London. So we are actively seeking to represent those at the sharpest end of the housing crisis, those who are most likely to be impacted by things like illegal evictions. We are also doing a lot of work to push local authorities to actually use the powers that they have. And what we're seeing, as we mentioned previously, is that local authorities are often unwilling or unable or don't have the skills to actually use even their current powers. And so in terms of giving that sort of pressure from the ground up in terms of pushing local authorities to be more proactive actually we think that this approach is longer term, more sustainable than a lot of people going into the temporary accommodation system experiencing the worst outcomes of the housing system that way. So I think you need that approach both from the Mayor's Office and the GLA pushing local authorities to do more, but also pressure from the actual users of these services who have the direct experience and can provide that evidence and can address the needs they have directly, whether that's for translation services or other things that would make those services more accessible.
In terms of support, the way that we organise our members who are renters across the country and in London specifically is a few key things. One is making sure that people are aware of their rights. We do tons of outreach. We have organisers and our members like doing door-to-door conversations, hundreds, maybe thousands a week across the country. So we're really in touch with what is actually happening on the ground, and I think we're in a really good position with our networks to reach people that local authorities or City Hall maybe wouldn't with any workshops or training or information that they're putting out. So any support with that. But as I've mentioned before, like knowing your rights is one thing, but unless you have the means to enforce them and assert your rights is meaningless. So what we also do is organise our members to organise campaigns to support each other, to put pressure on whether that's landlords, letting agents or local authorities to make sure that their rights are respected, and also organising campaigns to improve this, like the Renters' Rights Act. People around this table, the organisations that we're part of, have been really, really instrumental in pushing this forward, and probably wouldn't have happened without the work of some of the people on this panel. In terms of I think as well, in terms of how we can work with the Mayor and City Hall, I think that for local authorities that we do have good relationships with, I think we're so valuable because some of the examples that I've just brought up today, just a couple, some people look shocked by that. I think there's a huge disconnect by what people in policymakers, local authorities, what they think is happening and what is actually happening on the ground from people that we speak to. And for people that are interested in making real change and actually addressing some of these issues, then we've got vital people. We've got so many case studies and members who have been affected by this issue that we can provide and useful information about what's happening on the ground. So we think it really is a relationship that will work both ways, and we're really keen to develop that partnership how we can.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, both of you. Final question from me is to Ben. You may have already covered this, actually, but feel free to expand if not. From your perspective, Ben, how can the Mayor support enforcement capacity, in particular, by working with boroughs, renters' unions and other key stakeholders in the private rented sector?
Thanks, Sam. There's a number of ways that I've touched on already. Just to recap, the current landlord licence checker and the current rogue landlord checker could be doing much more to encourage local authorities to go further, to share best practice where those local authorities are, making a difference. But if it was backed up with some robust funding or capacity, that would be even more helpful. So trying to make sure that there's somewhere for local authorities to turn to when they have a question about a legal predicament they might be dealing with, or somewhere to turn to seek the seed funding that they need to make that initial investment in enforcement. I think the long-term ambition for government is that local authority enforcement will fund itself through the stronger fines that are able to be dished out through the Renters' Rights Act, but that will only happen if you get that initial funding up front and you get some big you get some big wins early on in terms of being able to enforce the new law. So those are some of the key areas. The rogue landlord checker, just to clarify where we're at right now, I used it on Friday. It has a list of local authorities and their enforcement actions that they've taken over the last 3 years. 14 out of the 32 local London boroughs were not on the checker at all. So that either means that it's not up to date, or it means that 14 local authorities in the last 3 years have not had a single positive, successful outcome in terms of enforcement that they're willing to report. Even if it's not up to date, I would suggest that there are many local authorities where there's literally no enforcement happening whatsoever. And when we can talk about how renters feel about asserting their rights, our polling that we did with Opinion last year found that 2 in 5 renters in London said they would not be confident taking action against their landlord due to disrepair or concerns over illegal behaviour. 3 in 5 not saying that they wouldn't be confident is actually probably overstating their case, because actually if they knew that some local authorities where they might live are doing nothing to help with that enforcement, then the confidence levels would dip even more, I think. Housing is one of those rare areas where the more you know about your rights and the practice that's happening, the less confident you become, because you know that you're not going to be supported. So the Mayor really needs to take a grip of that and be pushing councils to fulfil these rights, but also making sure that councils can speak to each other where good practice is happening. For example, I was speaking to Ealing Council, who you'll hear from later on today, and they've already hired someone to work on tenant relations in the anticipation of this act coming in. Not every local authority will have done that, but actually, making sure your capacity is there from the start, making sure the 1st of May isn't just a small fizzling out of a social media post, but instead is actually an all-encompassing approach to speaking to renters and landlords, will be the start, and the Mayor can really take a lead on that with the support of the GLA.
Thank you, panel.
Thank you. That has brought us to the end of our questions. Thank you so much for all your contributions. And we're going to take a short break of about 5 minutes and then review for our second panel. Thank you. To today's Housing Committee meeting, where we're discussing implementing and monitoring the Renters' Rights Act in London. Can I please welcome our second panel guests? And some people have very long titles, so bear with me. Ben Beadle, Chief Executive, National Residential Landlords Association. Dan Hawthorne, Executive Director for Housing and Social Investment, Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, and Co-Chair of London Housing Directors Group. Karen Swift, Director of Housing Strategy, Policy and Regulatory Assurance at the London Borough of Tower Hamlets, and Charlotte Ward, Head of Private Sector Housing, London Borough of Ealing. Thank you all for coming, and I know lots of you have been sat in the audience listening to the first panel, which is great. I'm going to kick off with renters' rights responsibilities for landlords with some questions for Ben, and then there will be some opportunities for the local authority questions. So just to kick it off, to what extent are landlords equipped to act upon their new rights and responsibilities, Ben?
Thank you for the invitation. So our research shows that about 60% of landlords have some knowledge of what's going on. I mean, that reflects extensive work on our part to make sure that landlords, and it's worth pointing out, I think we want these reforms to be a success for both landlords, renters, and the entire sector. So making sure that landlords have got access to quality advice, training, know exactly what's expected of them is something that NRLA has invested a significant amount of time and money in. But of course, you know, there will be landlords out there. We heard some horrific stories in the previous panel who well, hopefully won't be a member of NRLA, but you know, do need reaching out to make sure that they comply with what is going to be the biggest set of changes for the best part of 40 years. It will be a seismic shift, and whether it's fixed terms ending or databases or greater enforcement, landlords have got to get to grips, as have letting agents and property managers, in order to make the reforms a success. And that's why we're very keen to make sure that the comms around renters' rights doesn't sort of, I guess, kind of addresses both of the audiences in an equal way. You know, we you know, from the first session, you may well take away that the private rented sector is the Wild West, and there's lots of horrible landlords out there. I'm afraid the statistics don't bear that out. The private rented sector landlords have a far higher satisfaction with their tenants than the social sector. That's not to say that everything is fine and dandy, but we need to make sure that we are encouraging tenants to access the rights that are being afforded to them, but also speaking very even-handedly to the investor and private landlord upon whom we depend on so much to provide good quality housing. And I think it's very, very important that local authorities and indeed national government steer clear of unhelpful rhetoric and focus solely on what the reforms are going to bring, which hopefully is security for renters and certainty for landlords.
Thank you. We heard in the first panel that a lot of landlords aren't meeting their legal obligations. I know that you've just said that, you know, that's a variety. Oh, just quickly, how many London landlords are in the national? Sorry, I've got the National
NRLA.
Residential Landlords Association.
I'll have to check that figure for you. I haven't immediately got that to hand in my plethora of
No, I
notes.
just wondered as you were speaking, like, what's the
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of work with local authorities right the way across London. So we're speaking with local authorities and their landlords, of whom many will be members. But we have a very wide coverage right the way across the United Kingdom. We have over 110,000 members comprising landlords of all shapes and sizes. But when I follow up with my written evidence, I'll address that in the pack.
That'd be great to know. So, under the new obligations that come in from, you know, we were hearing around the 1st of May, do you think, you know, you said 60% of people are aware of them. Does that mean that they're ready to abide by those new regulations?
Well, given that government published yesterday details of what finally needs to go in tenancy agreements, I think they will now be able to start to make plans. We've been pushing very hard. Government spoke about a 6-month lead-in, but realistically, that's now only sort of a 3-4 month lead-in. And this isn't carping from the sidelines. This is reflecting that for millions of tenancy agreements will need to be updated. Tenants will need to be consulted and informed of their rights, because we want to make sure that things are done properly. And if you have several thousand, or you're a letting agent with potentially hundreds of thousands of tenancies, you need to know the rules of the game as early as possible in order to make the reforms a success. And so whilst we do have a decent amount of knowledge around the headlines of the scheme, now we're starting to see some of the detail. We can make sure that that is reflected in our templates that we provide to members and in our tenancy agreements and so forth. And that's the sort of, I guess, kind of collaborative and pragmatic approach that we want to take to these reforms come 1st of May. Preparedness is essential.
And what that's very interesting to hear that what you've been pushing on and what you've received in terms of guidance. What other measures are still kind of outstanding or might be the most challenging to implement or least likely that landlords are going to meet?
Yeah, well, I think there's, I guess the money shot really is sort of the ending of Section 21, and landlords are going to need to get to grips with a fault-based system, which I think they will be able to do quite quickly. I guess the unknown here is around court capacity and court reform, and we heard from renters groups in the previous panel that, whilst they're not particularly concerned about court capacity, actually they do need to be, because both renters and landlords need access to justice. And if we're to avoid some of the horrible stories where people don't have confidence in the systems that are underpinning these new reforms, and I'm not by any stretch condoning the actions of the stories that we heard previously, but landlords are between a rock and a hard place. And I would hate that they didn't follow the recommended measures to get possession of their property back, for example. So it is right, I think, to expect that greater investment in the court system, because, and that's the bit that's really missing for us. And I'm looking at my notes here. We've got comments from the Master of the Rolls and senior members of the judiciary saying, in order for these reforms to work, there does need to be significant investment in the court system. The court system is on its knees, and they're not my words. They're the Minister for Housing, Matthew Pennycook's words. So when we move to the abolition of Section 21 and we enter a fault-based system, it is right to say that that is going to require greater scrutiny, and the average time of 9 months at the moment, it is difficult to see how that is going to decrease in the new world without further investment.
Thank you. Over to Dan and Karen. What measures or standards in the Act are you expected to require the most enforcement action?
I think the short answer is it's really hard to know without because there's one of the things that didn't come up in the first session, which it's probably worth emphasising, is that one of the big shifts from the local authority angle that we're seeing with the move to the new legislation is that it's a move from powers to duties. That is to say, until now, the local authorities have had powers to intervene in this market, and different authorities choose to use those powers in different ways and to different extents. We're now moving into a world where every authority has a duty, and so every authority is starting from a different base, both in terms of the activity it already has, it already carries out, the infrastructure it has to carry out that work, but also the knowledge that it has of its own, the private rented sector in its own borough as a result of that work. And so there's no one answer to how much do we know and how big is the gap, but there is a gap everywhere, I think, in terms of understanding the fine detail of the sector in a local authority area and what this is going to mean. So I think, as Ben said, the headline issue which we've been kind of looking at most of all has been the end of Section 21 evictions, but in a way, it's not impossible to imagine that because that's the headline, that's actually the bit that has the most awareness, and therefore the one that landlords and tenants might have the highest awareness of and be navigating without local authority involvement. And it might well be actually that some of the finer details could be some of the areas where kind of compliance is less immediate, and therefore further work is needed. I guess the other thing that I would say before I hand over to colleagues is to say that, and I think there's some evidence to back this up from Scotland and Ireland, where laws like this are already in place, is that whatever the impacts are, we're not expecting to see them in one big bang. This is probably going to, I mean, London might be, England might be different, but there's some reason to think that kind of as awareness rises from the numbers that Ben's been talking about and that you heard about among tenants from the previous speakers, that we won't see those impacts all at once, but that over the kind of period of years, probably, as awareness grows, the picture will emerge slowly rather than immediately.
Thank you. Karen, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, just to echo what Dan said about it shifting from a power to a duty, that's already in force. That came in, I think, in December or January. So the duty is there now as opposed to the power. So that was one of the first things that was enacted at the beginning of the year. I've been at meetings with MHCLG and they talk about this bill being a polluters pay bill. So there's a real expectation that local authorities will enforce, and that's why it's now a duty, not a power. And I think with Dan, I'd agree with Dan that some of the areas landlords will be more familiar with, and certainly as a local authority on Section 21, it'd be something that we'd be more attuned to, because that often presents itself with a representation to us as a local authority for some housing assistance. So we'd definitely be picking up on that a lot quicker. In terms of some of the areas where maybe there's less understanding, if you think about the rent increase, which can only happen once a year in line with the market conditions, if a tenant wanted to object to that, it's a tribunal matter. So our involvement is sort of like not really there. Obviously, our involvement can be around, well, this is what the legislation says, this is your next step. So it could be sort of offering advice. Our intervention, as far as I understand it, is that that is a tribunal matter. So for us as a local authority, it's a lot about signposting people to where they can take their case forward in other ways, as opposed to us necessarily dealing with that particular matter and following it through. So it's really very much for us to sort of be really clear in what we are responsible for taking enforcement for, and what we might need to be sort of handing off in terms to other avenues whereby they can pursue that action.
Charlotte, just give you an opportunity. Is there anything else you want to add just on the parts of the Act that are expected to require the most enforcement action? I'm being quite specific because other colleagues have got other questions.
Well, I think the biggest change is that it's now, as has been said, a duty to investigate illegal eviction and harassment. So before we had the powers, but now we've got a statutory duty to do that. And that, I think, is going to be the biggest impact as a result of this Act on capacity for the team, and a new area of work that in the past we may have used it to gather evidence on whether or not somebody's issued a licence, but we may not have prosecuted because the penalties generally are very low. So that, to me, is the main headline for me.
Great. Just to ask a quick question back to Ben, so obviously we did hear that some landlords are failing in their obligations. Do you know why that is currently? And do
I know why that is currently?
I guess the underlying nature of my question is, and therefore what can we do about it? But, why are some landlords not meeting their current obligations?
Well, I mean, we're very, very clear, obviously, that whatever the rules of the game are, if you're in the business of letting property, it's a serious business and you should do it properly. And all of the support that we provide is predicated around that. Obviously, we campaign a particular way to make it as even-handed as possible. But once things become law, there's only one way of dealing with it. And that's why, we've been very, very clear about enforcement and the need to make in order to make the reforms a success, they will only work for as long as the enforcement mechanisms are there. So, you'll hear no bleating from me about sort of duties and of local authorities. I mean, what I would say around that is that needs to be done in a particular way, because there is a school of thought out there that good landlords are getting hammered. And everybody gets tarnished with the same brush. I touch on, some of the comments from before about, that landlords are conning renters. No, they're not. They're absolutely not. And we need to be very, very careful with our language. If we look at some of the figures that are out and available, 4/5 of properties in the private rented sector already meet the decent home standard that hasn't come in yet, the equivalent standard for the social sector. So, we're all for high standards, but that needs to be done in a balanced way. And so my message to landlords as these reforms come in is, either shape up or ship out. There isn't any real middle ground. But I think from a policymaker's perspective, we have to be very careful about the impact on good landlords, because we need supply and we need landlords to stay.
Yeah, and obviously the Act is being brought in to address the issues that are being brought up in the first panel, and they are, as we heard, serious and chronic for the people who are experiencing them. Assemblymember Waff, you've got a question, and then I'm going to move
Yes,
on.
very quickly. Is this going to take, perhaps to Ms Ward and to Ms Swift, is this going to be more work for you?
Yeah.
Yes, that's good. We like those kind of answers. And have you been given, how much more money?
We've got that coming. We've got resources coming.
The resources coming?
Yeah.
OK, I'll leave it there. Sorry, apologies, Chair.
I'm just going to take the opportunity to welcome our guests in the audience. So we've got Year 5 students and staff from Henwick Primary School in Greenwich. Hello. We're discussing renters and renters' rights, so people who rent their homes, and we're asking questions of councils and a representative from a landlord's organisation. Good to have you with us. So on to Assemblymember Mwema, who's online.
Good morning, panel. My questions are around landlords' awareness of rights and responsibilities. Before I kick off, though, I just wanted to ask Ben one particular question, and then just follow up on a question I asked the previous panel. So it would be really helpful if you, when you do send your written evidence, Ben, on behalf of the NRLA, to give the committee a bit of an idea of the split between institutional and small landlords that are in your membership in London, because I think they're slightly, well, they're very different audiences, but some of the conversation that we've had lands differently depending on who you're talking to. And I think different, like small landlords might be unaware that they're doing something bad, whereas the excuses are slightly less if it's a large landlord. But so I'd be really grateful for that. I just wanted to, this about discharge into the private rented sector. Is that something that I can ask here, Chair?
Yeah, I think it fits here. Yeah.
Okay, fine. Perhaps I'll start with the local authorities in that case. So, what in your opinion, do you think that the Renters' Rights Act will have a positive or negative impact on your responsibilities around discharging homelessness duty into the private rented sector? And as I was saying, I think my question was misunderstood. It was not a question about temporary accommodation. It's about kind of the legal requirements that you have to find people permanent accommodation. And quite often that is private rented sector. I just wondered what your views are on the benefits or disbenefits of this Act on you as customers rather than landlords in this space.
But just specifically on that point, so come into wider points in a minute.
Yeah, and I'll have a go at it. And I think it's quite hard to keep the answer to that question completely specific, because what we're talking about here with the Renters' Rights Act is a kind of specific intervention which is part of a much bigger system. And that is certainly, that is a system in which local authorities are as you say, shoppers in the private rented market, not just for discharge of duty into the private sector, although of course that is happening, but also as ways to prevent homelessness, as it were upstream in the homelessness system of preventing a duty arising in the first place by achieving a successful prevention, by helping someone stay or achieve a secure tenancy in the private sector. And of course, we are also in the market for temporary accommodation. And so, kind of, while I recognise your question isn't specifically about that, it's the fact is that we're seeking supply for all three of those reasons in the private rented market, not just in our own boroughs, but in London, because for very many boroughs, certainly including my own, it's impossible to contain that demand entirely within the private rented sector supply within borough boundaries. And that's one of the really complex issues that we're all working in each other's areas here, not just in our own. But I think the short answer to your question of what impact do we expect is that we just don't know. And I think that's kind of for at least two reasons. Firstly, that this is a new intervention, and while there's some precedent from other places where this has been introduced, the London housing market has shown itself to behave in ways that isn't the case in other parts of the country, and therefore I wouldn't want to extrapolate too much from what we've seen elsewhere to predict how the market will behave and how landlords will take decisions. I think the other thing that makes it difficult to predict and will make it difficult to map even once we've got evidence in front of us is that we already know that there's a whole range of factors affecting landlords' behaviour in the market, changes in interest rates, changes in other regulatory elements. And so we are already, as shoppers in that market for private rented housing, for example, seeing landlords asking for their properties back because they're exiting the business for one reason or another. And so there'll be a task in kind of isolating the effect in order to understand the impact of this intervention as opposed to, compared to the other factors that are influencing landlord behaviour. I've already strayed, I think, off the topic of the question, but it's, as I say, it's quite hard to isolate it because we're talking about a really big system here.
I'll go back to Assembly Member Moema to ask the question.
Yeah, I just wondered if any either Charlotte or Karen had any thoughts on that, or you agree with what Dan has said.
So I think one of the previous speakers said that the Act isn't about homelessness, but obviously, as Dan's pointed out, there is going to be an impact. I mean, for us in Tower Hamlets, the second biggest reason why people come and present to us as homeless is because they're evicted from a private rented property. The first reason is family and friend evictions. I think that's standard across London in terms of the top two reasons. And sometimes the Section 21 notices overtake the family and friend evictions. So I certainly think that whilst it's not an act that's directly about homelessness, I'm expecting certainly that it will have an impact in terms of preventing people from presenting because their tenancies have come to an end through no fault of their own. I was a local authority with about 3,500 households in temporary accommodation. We can't build homes fast enough, although we're building more homes than any other local authority in London. Certainly by discharging duty into the private rented sector, which all local authorities do, and so for some people who are homeless who've come out of the private rented sector, they often want to go back into it with our assistance, whether that's a grant to support them to get back into the sector. So I mean, there's no doubt that having a more stable private rented sector where the evictions are limited to a certain number of reasons, one of which is not no fault, some rent security, rent stabilisation, I would think that the sector may become, for some people who are homeless, a sector possibly of a tenure of choice rather than waiting in temporary accommodation for a social housing tenancy that might not materialise in the timescales that they've got. So I mean, I think there are positive benefits for local authorities who are working with homeless households in order to secure private rented accommodation.
Thanks. Assembly Member Moema, I just wondered if we could go to the question, just because we're running out of time.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
Okay. Sorry about that. Back to you, Ben. To what extent do landlords in London understand the changes to their rights and responsibilities as a result of the Renters' Rights Act?
So I can talk sort of generally rather than specifically London. The percentage of awareness actually is 67%. So 67% nationally is pretty high, I think, with a further 25% at least kind of roughly aware that there's going to be some big change fairly soon. It would be fair to say, but I do think that, and following on from the previous panel, you know, the 1st of May is going to be a very, very significant date, and it's one that both local authorities and government at a national level need to get landlords and renters on side to get prepared and to get thinking about some of the things that they're going to need to be doing. And for renters, that means greater rights are coming, and for landlords, it means getting your ducks in a row, making sure that you're ready to serve transition papers and amended agreements, and taking a long, hard look at your portfolio and the way that it's going to work in the future. But I did just want to, I mean, one of the areas that landlords are acutely aware of is the abolition of Section 21. But it's worth me correcting, I think. You know, I think in the previous panel, Section 21 was cited as being the leading cause of homelessness. Actually, if you look at the eviction figures currently, landlords selling is the leading cause of homelessness. Section 21 is just the way that it is executed. And so in terms of the new world, I wouldn't be terribly upbeat, to be honest with you, that this is going to make a huge amount of difference to homelessness provision. Landlords will still be able to evict their tenant if they wish to sell, if there are serious rent arrears, and if there's antisocial behaviour. And I think, you know, there's going to be groups that are disappointed that Section 21 abolition hasn't had more of an impact. I fully accept, by the way, that for those unscrupulous landlords who hold Section 21 over someone's head and hike up the rent and things like that, that will bring greater security and there will be a benefit there. But I think generally it's not going to be a significant change to the underlying figures, and I think it's important that we're aware of how Section 21 is used before we assume.
Okay.
Sam, we've lost you. No, the noise.
Sorry.
There
we go. Okay, thank you. Noting that the Mayor of London doesn't necessarily have a formal role in kind of shaping or advising on the sector, nonetheless, do you think that there is a role for the Mayor to play in advising or supporting landlords for them to understand their rights and responsibilities in the same way that there is an expectation on behalf of tenants to do the same?
Yeah, I do. It comes back to that even-handed point. You know, this isn't. It runs the risk of being a culture war if we are not careful. And I think that the Mayor would do very well to recognise that, and I think he has recognised, to be fair, because, you know, he's realised, I think, that it is very difficult to build new homes. That's why he's cut the social housing quota from 35% to 20%. It costs a lot of money to build new homes, and actually we do need a thriving private rented sector with people that are prepared to take risk. To be in the sector and continue to provide those homes. And if we don't, then I'm afraid then, you know, that's going to be problematic for all of the good things that are apparently in the Act for renters. You can have as much regulation as you want, but if the homes aren't there to regulate, you've got a bit of a problem. And I think the Mayor could really be very helpful in terms of how he addresses both the landlord and renter community. Yes, there are you know, good and bad of each, but most renters are pretty good and most landlords are pretty good, and we must remember that.
Okay, and then finally from me, Chair, what would that look like? Because I know that I have, and I think other members have had conversations with NRLA in recent times about some requests that NRLA members have, which are beyond the scope of the Mayor's powers, very much national things. But what would that assistance or that support look like?
So, I mean, I think the Mayor could be, you know, could be quite helpful in terms of approach to licensing. It came up in the previous session. You know, the Renters' Rights Act is going to deal with licensing, in my view. It's going to have a database of landlords. Every property is going to be on it. If you don't register your property, you'll be hung, drawn and quartered, and rightly so. But it follows that you don't need the double up of selective licensing. And so, what we heard from the previous session, really, and it is a view, I think, shared increasingly widely, that local authorities apologies, folks, but local authorities have become addicted to this cash, and it's very difficult to replace. The actual database system will give targeted enforcement. It will give renters the information they need about properties, which I think is a good thing, by the way. You know what you're moving into. You know whether a property is safe. There's nothing not to like about it. But you don't need the double up of selective licensing. I exclude mandatory licensing from that comment because bigger properties have far greater risks. But the whole licensing regime could be much more readily simplified. And if people like Rachel Reeves get licensing wrong, what hope is there for the average landlord that's out there?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the only comment I'd make is that we wouldn't allow somebody to drive a car without a license without them understanding their obligations. And I'm not sure why, I know this is not the point you're making, but why it would be the case for somebody who is providing a service or, letting out a property. Final question, Chair, I promise. Do you, in your opinion, do you think landlords, the changes that the changes that are required are sufficiently understood by landlords, so that they can follow the new legislation when it's kind of picks up in May? And if so, what changes are required if you feel like they don't?
And if we could have a brief answer, just because we need
Very
to move
brief.
on.
So licensing is no assessment of quality. It is just a little certificate that says that you've had a gas safety and maybe somebody's inspected it. So, we mustn't trick ourselves to think that this is going to do anything significant in terms of be some sort of driving test. There's no exam associated with it. I think as far as the awareness is concerned, a lot of the detail is still coming out. So, yes, I think landlords are aware about Section 21 going. They are aware about replacement grounds and needing to use Section 8, and things will take longer. But as other members have said, there are also some other things that will be coming over months and years if you take into account the Decent Homes Standard. So that is why I think government needs to be very, very clear with investors and landlords alike about what their obligations are. And we're obviously happy to play our part.
We need to move on.
Sure, we're happy to play our part, but government needs to be have greater clarity about what's expected, and it follows that local authorities do too.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just really aware of time. On to Assemblymember Small-Edwards.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon now, panel. My question will be to the local authority representatives, and we'll start with Charlotte, if that's okay, and then go across. Do you think that local authorities in London have the resources needed to enforce the Renters' Rights Act when it comes in?
The short answer is no, we don't, not yet. It's very difficult to plan for something that's so huge, and there's so many new offences under the Act that we're going to be regulating. We can plan so much. So, we've got a new civil penalty notice policy. We'll have a new enforcement policy. They'll be ready to go by the 1st of May, ready to be up on the website for people to see. On the website, we can put lots of information out there to landlords so that they're aware of their responsibilities. We can link in with the NRLA and the London Landlord Accreditation Scheme to push courses for landlords to do. We can do all of that. We can try and push information out to tenants. We can have rent repayment order processes. We can get all of this stuff ready in the background. And as somebody said earlier, we've actually hired somebody who's going to be leading the team that will grow a team to be able to carry out the enforcement we need. But the biggest challenge we have is getting really good, competent, knowledgeable staff. And that is our biggest challenge. So the environmental health degree, which is a 4-year degree, the numbers the graduate supply has just not kept up with the demand that local councils have. And there's the environmental health degree covers not just housing, but food and health and safety. You know, it's a 4-year course, but there is now a course that's supported by the Mayor of London, that's accredited by the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health, that's just over a year, that's just the housing element of that degree, which would be fantastic. But for some reason, that isn't covered by the apprenticeship levy. If we could get that covered by the apprenticeship levy, then more councils will take on staff, that we could get them onto that training programme, and then more universities will start to offer that course. To me, that's the biggest challenge we've got, because if we can get the staff in, we'll be able to manage it. It's not a lack of will, it's a lack of staff. And I can't hand out these new enforcing responsibilities on my existing team because they're already at capacity. We've already got statutory duty to investigate complaints of disrepair. So everybody's already working beyond what they're capable of doing. So I need to build a new team that has the knowledge and the experience, that could stand up in a tribunal and say, you know, if challenged, stand up and say, yes, I'm competent and this is why I know what I'm doing. You know, it's a big ask and it's a very niche area of law, and actually getting to that point there's no quick fix, and it's very, very difficult to plan for.
So would you say it's more of a skills gap than a funding gap, or both?
It's both. If we had the funding now, we could start to grow that team. We haven't got that funding in place yet. You know, it's going to be a challenge to plan ahead so that we are taking enforcement and maybe getting some income stream as a result of civil penalties. But it's a big challenge. It's very easy to say, yeah, we're going to be issuing fines. It's not as easy as that. Gathering the evidence is very complicated. Being successful if we get appeals is going to be very difficult and incredibly time-consuming. So we need the funding first, and then we need to grow the team. And growing that team so that they're expert is, to me, the biggest single challenge.
Thank you. Karen?
Yeah, so I would support all what Charlotte has said. And we have had a first tranche of new burdens money, but it's not sufficient to support the recruitment of staff because we don't know what the ongoing levels are going to be. So the small amounts of money that we have had, which were announced in December, I think most people are on the local authority calls that we've had. Most people are using that to sort of shore up their current infrastructure, particularly around CPN processes. So most local authorities struggle with the penalty notice in our local authority for penalty notices where we are into debt recovery. For anything under 5,000, we're at a debt recovery of about 53%, but anything over 5,000, our debt recovery is around 18%. There's a real sort of like barrier around debt recovery. We're not necessarily sort of sophisticated enough, and the courts and the way the interface with the courts works, it means that the debt recovery is something we've really got to sort of get on top of. So most authorities are using the small amounts of funding that they've got to sort of shore up the infrastructure around sort of debt recovery, using the small amounts of money we've got for communications, for training, and for just sort of making sure our databases are ready in terms of reporting against the new KPIs. We are expecting more resources to be announced and new burdens in the next month or so. We're hoping that those will be significant enough that we could start to recruit staff on the back of knowing that that funding was going to be for 1, 2 or 3 years. But again, you know, existing teams can't manage the sort of service requests that we're going to get in relation to the new provisions. But at the moment, it's very much around focusing on the awareness and just bolstering existing systems, which are going to have to come into play a bit more because of the way the Act is structured.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, I've got a bit more to say about the money, but I think you might be coming to that in a minute, so I'll okay, well, fine. So then 2 points, one on money and one separate. The bit that's not about money is that, and every council will be organising this slightly differently, not least because they're starting from a structure which is slightly different. But certainly where I work in Kensington and Chelsea, this requires a kind of new level of complexity about the joint working between the frontline homelessness team, the environmental health team, and the trading standards team, all of whom have roles to play in this, it's certainly the case, and we've heard already this morning about kind of shrinking local authority budgets. And one of the things I think that suffered in that context is that even where local authorities have historically had capacity in kind of tenancy relations officers, that's been squeezed as part of the budget position. So that, and those skills, which need to be, as Charlotte said, more technical than ever because of the, we're talking about kind of, as I understand it, kind of criminal levels of evidence standard in order to be able to pursue these cases through the courts. So you can't just give this work to a member of staff already working on the homelessness front line. You need specialist skills, which have certainly you can't rely on local authorities having been able to retain those over the years. Some of those skills actually at the moment, where they exist mostly in parts of the voluntary and community sector, which are advising tenants and about their situation, and it's not impossible to imagine a bit of a zero-sum game where we're trying to take those skills and where those skills exist is in that sector, and that's not going to help anyone because that sector needs those skills too. So what Charlotte describes about having to grow our own and skill up a workforce is really important. There's also an option, which we've certainly been looking at, of somehow whether we can commission some of the work that we need to do to fulfil our duties here from the voluntary and community sector. I'm not saying that's what we've decided to do, but we're certainly looking at it as an option. On the money point, Karen's exactly right. The new burdens funding that we've had so far has been for let me get the numbers right, 25-26. We are hoping to get confirmation of what we'll get for 26-27. Obviously, the sooner we get that, because councils are setting their budgets kind of in the next few weeks, the sooner that we can start to plan. As we've heard already, the long-term aim is that this becomes effectively a self-funding regime where the fees that are paid by landlords to register and the fines that are levied through the enforcement process fund the work. But that's certainly not going to happen in the first financial year. And so the sooner we can be certain about what funding we've got, the sooner we can start the work of trying to meet that gap. But again, kind of going back to the point of because we don't know quite the scale here, there's a bit of a chicken and egg question about how much work there'll be, how much money we'll be able to raise, and therefore how we balance those budgets. But a bit of certainty, at least for the first year, ideally for the first couple of years, would be really helpful, I think, to begin to map that out and begin to plot that route to a self-sustaining system from a financial point of view.
Very briefly, two-thirds of councils in England haven't prosecuted a single landlord in the past 3 years, despite receiving 300,000 complaints from tenants. Less than half of the enforcement revenue has been collected. I think one of the tangible things the Mayor could do, particularly in light of the evidence that's been given today and against the backdrop of those Guardian figures, is better understand the ability of London councils to actually meet the demands that are being placed on them, and actually to give confidence to the sector. We'd be pushing, we want to know, kind of what councils are doing and what the enforcement activity is. So actually committing to some sort of annual report would also be very, very helpful as to see whether the reforms are a success.
Sorry, I might add one thing, if I may, which is that I mentioned earlier that different councils are starting from different places on this because of the differing extents to which they've already implemented selective licensing, for example, and that very significantly informs the answer to the question of how ready we are. So a council that already has a selective licensing scheme in place will probably be slightly more advanced in terms of its skills and capacity and understanding its and the kind of simple machinery of levying and receiving fines than a local authority like mine, which hasn't introduced selective licensing. So again, there's no single answer that covers all boroughs on readiness, but broadly speaking, the more you've done on selective licensing, the slightly further ahead you are in your readiness, if that makes sense.
Yeah, completely. Thank you all for your responses. Are there any particular measures which you think will be much harder to enforce than others within the Renters' Rights Act?
I don't know if there's any that are going to be more challenging than any others. I think probably illegal eviction and harassment, just for the sake of gathering that evidence and how complicated that is. So we already do investigate complaints of that, but often the tenants have moved on, and then it's very difficult to get witness statements, and then it's very hard to get your bundle of evidence together. So that's probably going to be the most challenging, more challenging than the offences about rental discrimination and things like that. They'll be much easier to prove.
Thank you. We spoke a bit in the previous panel about communicating the measures in the Renters' Rights Act to people in London. are you aware or involved in that piece within your own boroughs of how you're updating people on what rights that they'll have from May?
Yeah. We've got a comms plan about when we'll start to roll things out. The government have announced that they're going to be having a comms plan. Their strategy will be going out in April, I understand. So we'll hopefully piggyback on that and also have some more sort of local stories. And, we have, landlord newsletters where we can get out the information, which we've already started to do. And we're pushing, like I said, the courses that NRLA are running and the London Landlord Accreditation Scheme, which is all about education for landlords.
I'll come on to the comms point in a minute, but just in terms of the illegal evictions, MHCLG are putting on, through Shelter, I think, really a comprehensive bespoke training for housing options officers who are managing the sort of homelessness sort of eviction side of things. So there is already a sort of like a skilling up of that particular sector through MHCLG training programs. I mean, just in terms of the comms, in Tower Hamlets, there are 38% of the homes are in the private rented sector. That's about 49,000 properties. So we're committed to making sure that the Act lands well for everybody. So that means that our comms will be equally directed to landlords and letting agents, of which we have about 500, as well as to tenants. And I think there was a really good point made earlier on at the earlier panel around the sort of the different assets that you might be able to use that can sort of maximise sort of take up of the comms messages. So there was talk about the Mayor's assets, but we also have our own assets as well. So making sure that we're utilising those. I think there was also a point that came up at the last panel around language, making sure that our comms is sort of, particularly in a borough like Tower Hamlets, that our comms is resonating with people whose first language is in English. So we'll be making sure that for all stakeholders, landlords, agents and tenants, that our comms is equally directed to those different stakeholders.
Yeah, just to kind of, at risk of staying absolutely bleeding obvious, I think we know that we should use what we know about the demographics of renters in London to think about how you target the comms, whether that's to do with age profiles or geography profiles and so on. And I think it's probably also worth. I absolutely. Again, anticipating kind of perhaps a question you might be coming to, that I absolutely think that one of the biggest contributions the Mayor and GLA could make is in relation to helping with that comms effort. I absolutely agree. It needs to be pointing both to the kind of the landlord and the landlord supporting infrastructure, as well as to renters and potential renters. But a kind of a bit of thought about what the division of labour there is between boroughs and the Mayor and the government, because we should be using our resources and targeting our resources in a way that's kind of complementary if we're all going to be doing that work, which we all absolutely should.
Brilliant. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I've just got a couple of follow-up questions. Just on why currently councils aren't enforcing, and I know you've touched on this a little bit, Charlotte, in terms of gathering evidence, but we heard from the first panel about that kind of discrepancy of some of the council services where people get kind of pursued for council tax and then landlords seem to not get any kind of pursual. And I just wondered if you wanted to speak to, and some of the data that Ben just raised around, that enforcement action not being taken. So I just wondered if you could just speak to that a bit more about why councils are currently not pursuing that action.
Well, obviously I don't know the specifics, but it may be that councils are taking enforcement action, but they don't at the moment have to register things on the rogue landlord database that the GLA administer. So it may be that they've issued civil penalty notices, but it's not publicly available to see.
And why would that be?
Well, they don't have to. So the rogue landlord database administered it's just across London, administered by the GLA. If we issue a civil penalty notice for somebody who hasn't got a licence and they should have, we don't have to. At Ealing we do, but I know a lot of councils don't, and there is some call that the name possibly could change because it's not a great name, calling it rogue landlord database. There's things like that, and some councils, the decision has been not to log what enforcement they've taken. So it's hard to answer that question because I don't actually know. And if we knew of a borough that isn't taking enforcement, I would, you've got to direct that question to them. I mean, we certainly carry out quite a lot, but it's It's incredibly time-consuming, and we have to be really sure of ourselves. You know, we're in the tribunal about once a month at the moment. We've got an awful lot of cases going through for a whole range of offences. But is that publicised? You know, not until it's all over. Then would we run some publicity?
Thank you. And then I think, Karen, it was you that mentioned newsletters. Was it you that mentioned landlord newsletters, or was it Charlotte? Someone mentioned... just from my awareness, I know there's kind of landlord forums and landlord newsletters, but is there a sense that they're going to people that are already aware and functioning, or are you really reaching people that really need to know? Do you know what I mean? Is it because it's a bit of an opt-in, isn't it, for landlords? So I'm just wondering how you kind of reach out to the landlords that need to know.
We're really fortunate at Ealing that we have a licensing scheme that covers about 2/3 of the borough. So we have an amazing database of all the landlords and all the managing agents. So we can email out to 25,000 people really quickly and push information out to them. Whether or not they click on it and open it is another matter. We actually track what links they look at and what they don't, you know, what articles have caught their interest. But yeah, that is an issue, because how do we reach those really difficult to reach landlords? But having a licensing scheme is massive in terms of having that fantastic database.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Oh, Karen, yeah.
So just to say, in Tower Hamlets, we have 3 licensing schemes which have about 12,000 properties that are listed. So not as extensive as Charlotte's. And we've also got a landlord event at the end of January, which is targeting our landlords in the borough who work with us around homelessness prevention. But one area that's particularly we're going to put a lot of focus in terms of our comms is that of the 22,000 properties that we manage as the local authority, half of those are leasehold properties. I mean, most of those are rented out. So for us, targeting through our leasehold services the landlords who are renting out in our stock, certainly around sort of making sure that they're up to speed on what the changes are and directing them to the RLNA website so that they as landlords can get independent advice, but directing them to our website as well, which will set out what the new legislation is. So for us, having that dynamic within our stock of 50% of leaseholders, which I think is one of the highest in the country, it does present us with an opportunity to directly target those landlords.
And do you think that everyone does that? Do they use that mechanism around their leasehold, knowing?
I would have thought so.
I don't think it's ever safe to say everyone.
Okay.
I mean, if kind of part of what we're doing here is thinking about how do we establish good practice and disseminate it to the maximum possible extent, I think it's worth logging that as an idea, because I'm sure there are some that aren't, I think is what I'm saying, or aren't to the full extent they could.
Just one quick figure. There's 2.46 environmental health officers for every 10,000 units in London. I suggest the problem probably starts there.
Yeah, that's very stark. We're going on to Assembly Member Boff now.
Ms Ward, I mean, the Rogue Landlords database, it's a bit rubbish, isn't it? Perhaps I should rephrase that. Perhaps I should say something like, it doesn't live up to its sold expectations, does it really?
Well, I think it's excellent. I think it's an excellent database. I think the name change might be more helpful, but it's an excellent way for us to look if there's been enforcement carried out by other boroughs across London.
But you just said to us that some people don't bother with it.
Some people don't, but some people do. And we have had licence applications, and we check every single one to see whether there's been enforcement, and we check that database. And we've had several that have come up, and we've seen that they've been prosecuted by other boroughs.
So if people used it, it would be great, but they're not, are they? Some boroughs
Well,
aren't.
I don't have the numbers on how many boroughs use it a lot and how many don't use it so much, but all I can say is it's been very useful.
Okay. Mr Hawthorne has already referenced something that the Mayor can do in terms of coordinating the messaging, and that seems quite a sensible thing. Is there anything else the Mayor should be doing in order to get this Renters' Rights Act working in London? Mr Hawthorne again.
Yeah, I think alongside the communications, I think the other big category is helping to understand at the kind of London system level, if you like, what's helping us to understand what's happening once this becomes fully operational. And I think that covers at least two things to help monitor and kind of share experience and best practice of how council's kind of capacity is matching demand, and to try and build a kind of London-wide picture of that, I think, or to perhaps work with London councils to help build that picture would be really helpful. But the other thing, and it's kind of, I referred to it before, which is perhaps even more difficult to monitor but feels equally important, is to do it. You know, we should all be working together, those of us who have an interest in the London housing system, to understand how these different interventions are affecting the whole system. And so, going back to the question I was asked before about the specific question of discharge of duty, I think and as Karen said, that if this legislation does its job, there will be fewer cases of people presenting as homeless or at risk of homelessness as a result of eviction by their landlord. So that will be, as it were, a net positive impact on the increasingly difficult task that we have as local authorities to manage the homelessness situation. It would be, one of the things that we're curious about, and it simply feels impossible to predict at the moment, is whether there will be a kind of corresponding impact on our ability to procure rented homes to prevent homelessness, or for use as temporary accommodation, or to discharge duty, because this has an effect on landlord behaviour in the way that some people have articulated it might do. And so understanding, as it were, those net effects and how this affects the whole system, and trying to the maximum extent possible to understand how it's playing alongside the other factors that affect landlord behaviour and the other factors that are driving the London private rented market. That's a big ask, but it seems to me that one of the things that we talk about at the kind of London housing directors level is that we can, even when we can see what's happening in the London rental market, it's not always easy for us to understand why it's happening, and therefore what levers that we and the GLA and others could try and pull in order to mitigate some of the damaging impacts of that. So I think any contribution the GLA can make to boosting our shared understanding of how all these different interventions and market factors are affecting the rental market as a whole, and the experience of private renters and councils as acting in that market, would be really helpful. Sorry, it's a kind of long answer, but it's a system point.
I certainly value that. I think it's long been held that you can fix one part of the market, but it's very difficult to not then destroy the rest of the market in trying to fix that bit. And so, but taking a holistic approach is very difficult in a complex market. Ms. Swift.
So just to say that I'd support what Dan was saying, and we were talking about this earlier on, but when they introduced similar legislation in Ireland and Scotland, in Ireland there was a shift to short-term lets by landlords. So there are things other examples that you can look at as how the market might shift. I know that MHCLG have got a countermeasure to that, in that they are introducing a short-term let registration scheme. And local authorities will be enforcing that. And we know that short-term lets in London can only be rented out for 90 days, but it's very difficult to enforce that as a local authority. We're very complaint-driven. We don't proactively go out and look at databases. But maybe the register might provide at least a sort of register of where we know where they are, and may involve some more proactive enforcement. But I think, adding to Dan's point, we already know from Ireland that there was that shift, but unlikely to happen in London because of some of the countermeasures, but it's just an example of how landlords' behaviours sort of change. And just in terms of landlords moving out of the market, I mean, the legislation was in Parliament under the previous government under a different name, and then it was introduced under the Renters' Rights Bill name for this administration. It's been around for a long time. Landlords have known it's been coming. It's had cross-party support. I think, and Ben will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think landlords who didn't want to operate in this market have already left. And often landlords do sell to other landlords. We know that as well. So I'm not sure that, that's something to factor in when you're thinking about, well, how do we sort of try to at least predict or estimate what the impact's going to be on the May the 1st.
Mr. Beadle.
Yeah, if I can just address that point. I was going to say I think the Mayor could use the PRS partnership to bring stakeholders together across London. I think that would be a really tangible thing, whether it's landlords, renters, tenancy deposit schemes. I think that's would be a good takeaway. But of course, Andrew, this is the whack-a-mole approach to politics. There's something wrong in the short-term holiday letting, bang, we need to sort that out because everyone's gone over there, and then we wonder where they go. So we do need a bit more of a holistic approach. I hope that my counterpart is right, that those that have thought of exiting the sector have already done so, but it's worth pointing out that government data shows between 23 and 24 the number of private rented homes in London fell by 6%. Zoopla's research shows that 31% of homes for London are former rentals, and I totally get the ludicrous argument that those homes don't disappear, but it's very unlikely, given the state of play at the moment, that renters are going to be able to afford to buy, given where rents are at. And I think that underpinning all of this is supply, and I think it's another reason why we need to make sure that we tread very cautiously, treat our investors with respect because we need them to operate in the sector, but also continue to invest in social housing because, robbing Peter to pay Paul is not a strategy. We need to invest and we need to build, and that's something that's directly within the Mayor's control.
Thank you. I mean, it's fair to say that the homes don't disappear, but the rental opportunities do.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, to be fair, ministers have come to terms with the fact, actually, if it does result in a smaller private rented sector, well, maybe that's not a bad thing. I would argue to the contrary, because I don't see the social housing sector increasing. At a national level, we see the 1.5 million target likely to be missed by a country mile. So, be careful what you wish for, I think.
And Mr. Hawthorne, do you think that monitoring that you mentioned earlier, and thank you for raising that, should that include how many rentals there are in London now and how many there are going into the future?
I think that would be really interesting to track. Probably, I think you'd want to disaggregate it a little bit by kind of where those rentals are in the market. By which I mean, I'm speaking slightly from self-interest here, but certainly from a local authority point of view, we're most interested in the lower cost rental market, because that is where that's where the people most likely to be under threat of homelessness are shopping. That's where we're shopping for TA, and it's where it's likely to be affordable for us to be able to support people to go either on discharge or our prevention duties. I mean, you can imagine in Kensington and Chelsea, 46% of homes in Kensington and Chelsea are private rented. A lot of that is a very high-end market, as it were, which I don't think principally we are worried about here, if you see what I mean. So I wouldn't just want to track the overall gross numbers of the rental market. I'd want to try and figure out how to track the bits of the market we're most interested in.
So is the data there that can be used?
I think the data about the numbers is to a significant extent there. I think the thing that might be harder to track is where we see trends to identify what is the cause of them.
Thank you very much. And I think
you're enjoying that, weren't you? You were dead on time.
No, dead on time.
Yeah, it's very good. No, I could see you enjoying the question.
Praise for good behaviour, Chair. Praise for good behaviour.
I was just going to ask, just in this section around the Mayor of London and how he can support. So in the first panel, we heard about local authorities using their powers, some of them not using their powers, sometimes for the reasons you've described, but also maybe because of the lack of political cover to use them. So is there anything that the Mayor of London could do to provide cover and support for local authorities to maximise their use of these duties and powers?
I think the fact that we're moving from a powers world to a duty world probably makes that slightly less of a factor, if you see what I mean. Because I think to the extent that local authorities don't do what they are now required to do under this legislation, it's less about kind of political levers. There's an extent to which you can use political levers to make that happen, but there are much more kind of direct measures that can be taken against local authority that's not fulfilling its duties. And of course, on top of everything else that a private tenant might be facing as they're grappling with the mistreatment of a landlord, expecting them to take the local authority to court for failure to meet their duties is asking quite a lot. But nevertheless, a local authority should be complying by the law, as it were, and therefore I think the question of how we can persuade more or provide more political cover might become less of an issue in this new world than it has been in the old one. Is that?
Yeah, there's some nodding. Great. On to Assemblymember Lord Bailey for the last section.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Ben first. Ben, I'm going to ask whether what impact could the Renters' Right Act have on supply on private renters' property? I, for one, think that a reduction in the amount of private rental units in London would be absolutely devastating, because most people who have a housing lead are not entitled to social housing. So you can build all the social housing we like, they're never going to get into it. So private rental is going to be very important. But do you think that there could be a detrimental effect on the number of units available?
Yes, I do, and I won't repeat the figures that I said earlier, but we're already seeing a reduction in supply in London, which is why I think we have to tread very, very carefully. I think that whole supply piece, I totally get the argument about substandard properties and bringing bad landlords to book. That's not in dispute, but what I see really is a real downer on the private rented sector, a real downer on the individual investor that wants to provide housing, and some sort of fanciful kind of panacea of social housing that I'm not sure ever is going to be realised, even though it's a good idea. And we see that in London particularly with the quota being reduced, because it's costing a huge amount of money to build those homes, and that money simply isn't there. And that's why I think with any form of regulation, it needs to be executed with pragmatism. It needs to speak appropriately to those landlords that are providing decent homes, and take the rhetoric out of the equation, and make sure that they feel welcomed and are able to continue to provide those homes. But I do worry, and I don't think I won't attribute all of this to the Renters' Rights Act. By the way, I think there are a number of other factors that cause a landlord to rethink their investment, not least with a 25-year kind of property cycle. They may well be coming up to retirement and may well be thinking already. So I'm not sitting here saying the Renters' Rights Act, everyone's going to go for the hills, but it is another thing that makes it less attractive to invest in this great city, and I think that that's a huge problem for everybody.
Okay, thank you for your comments, because I can see I'm a massive fan of social housing, but we can't solve our housing problems entirely through.
No, and we have to accept, Lord Bailey, that there's a cost. There's a significant cost to all of that social housing. So whether you kind of discharge your duty to the average investor and use tax levers at your disposal, or whether you spend billions and billions of pounds on bricks and mortar, there is a huge cost to that. And I think there is a school of thought that alongside housing being a human right, that somehow it has to be really cheap and free, and I don't think that is the case at all. It costs, whichever way you invest, it costs money, and people want a return, whether you are a social provider or a private provider, and the sooner we come to terms with that, the better.
Yes, you see, local councils would love to build houses, but they find it expensive as well. So there's some proof of what you're saying. Let me come to our local authority colleagues. I'll start with Karen. I can't read from here. There's no chance I can see that sign from over here. How can the GLA and local authorities help mitigate the impact of the Renters' Right Bill if landlords are starting to leave? There is definitely figures that say landlords are leaving. There's no way that these houses are then going back to the people who are renting, because if they could buy, they'd have probably done that already. So is there anything else local authorities could do to help mitigate that?
I often believe, and maybe Ben can correct me, that landlords tend to sell to other landlords. But you were saying that, he's nodding. Okay, so landlords will go to their portfolio colleagues and try to offload if they were trying to sell. So it obviously stays back in the supply of the private renter sector as opposed to flipping to home ownership. It won't also always happen. Some people will decide they want to sell and want to move on, and they'll just go to the local estate agent. One of the things that we are doing as a local authority, and I'm sure Ben and Ealing are doing, Dan and Ealing are doing the same thing, is we have a positive acquisitions programme. So the GLA have the CHAPS programme, which is an acquisition programme. We have secured funding from the GLA to purchase 200 homes ourselves using the CHAPS funding on our own match funding. We're targeting ex-right to buy properties because obviously they're in our stock. They're second-hand, they're cheaper. We're managing the block anyway, but eventually we'll run out of supply of right to buy homes. So we're out there talking to private landlords and also to large developers about private rented homes that are out there that we could purchase through our positive acquisitions programme. So it's a small thing, but if landlords were exiting the market and didn't want to, wanted to sell and move on, we could be a purchaser for those properties, and then we're putting them back into our stock, some of which were being used for temporary accommodation, other which are going back onto the list for permanent letting. So it's a small thing, but most boroughs have acquisition programmes and could be targeting landlords to at least make them aware that, maybe we have right of first refusal, maybe they want to come and talk to us.
I mean, it's a great response. Is that councils are doing something, but I suppose it's a matter of scale. And I just want to ask Ben another question. We talked about landlords buying from other landlords, buying portfolios, but correct me if I'm wrong, aren't the majority of landlords sort of one or two properties that they own, maybe inherited, etc. Are they doing the same thing?
Yeah, so about 50% are people have one or two properties. So it does tend to be the smaller landlord. And typically, I'm generalising, but it's those sorts of landlords that have been in the business for a long time that are finding everything a little bit too much and deciding to do something different. But I would endorse that kind of approach from my local authority colleague. We have a similar arrangement where we deal with probably in the region of about 250,000 contacts from landlords a year. And when landlords ring up to say, I want to sell, I want to give notice, we have a partnership with a firm called Landlord Property Exchange, and we put them in touch with another investor so that they can acquire that property as a going concern and keep the tenant in the property. And that's a really pragmatic example, I think, of the sector coming up with a solution. But obviously, it doesn't solve the underlying issue of a general lack of supply, particularly in London, and the cost of actually building new homes.
Yeah, focus on this is quite a pragmatic response. There are people trying to there are institutions and tactics to keep these properties in the private sector. I'm quite pleased with that response. I thought everybody was leaving and we were all going to be living in tents. So I'm quite happy with that. Just to come to Charlotte, is there anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, just wanted to add, so with our licensing scheme, we have about almost 20,000 properties licensed in Ealing, and we're about 3.5 years through our our current scheme. And we are not finding at the moment an increase in the number of people who are revoking their licences due to selling it. We just aren't seeing that at all. And even though we're 3.5 years through, we're still getting the same number of new licence applications pretty much every month. So it's interesting, and time will tell. But at the moment, in Ealing, we are not seeing an exodus.
That's very good to know. Let me just... And the other thing is as well, I suppose the obvious question is, will any of this affect the rise in the cost of rent? Because it's hard it would be hard, I imagine, to separate any effect that this will be having, but basic economics will suggest it's going to have some kind of effect. Are we seeing that already? Ben, let me start with you.
Well, you've only got to look at the comments from the previous panel and government statistics that show, although rents are coming down, actually, they've been high for a very long period of time. Now, I wouldn't say that's about renters' rights. I would say it's about supply, but I'd also say it's about some of the kind of government factors and the cost of renting your property and taxation, all of the things that are perceived as being greedy landlords jacking up the rent for personal gain, when actually it's just simply a case of dealing with punitive taxation and excessive regulation. But it is right that if we have properties leaving the private rented sector, the more you're going to end up paying for it. And so, you know, I think this is going to be one of the stings in the tail in time with the Renters' Rights Act, that the more difficult you make it for investors to operate, the chances are that they may well think about doing something else. And I get that it's very regional, and I get it varies from local authority and, you know, a whole range of personal circumstances, but we can't play fast and loose with people's homes, particularly when government doesn't really seem to have a credible plan to replace those those homes that are being lost. So 1.5 million is the target, but actually, if as a result of this we lose many more homes from the private rented sector, that figure won't even touch the sides. And I think it's all the more reason why we need a holistic and pragmatic approach that works for responsible landlords and tenants alike.
Yeah, because there's this. Yeah, the 1.5 million, the government are just not going to get anywhere near. And of course, I go back to my thing about who are you providing these homes for? Because we are going to build those homes. I really do. I hope build 2 million. But the point is, who's eligible for those homes?
Well, and part of the issue that we're seeing play out at the moment is that as some landlords are selling and they are giving notices to tenants, potentially long-term tenants, those tenants haven't had a rent increase for a long time. They go to the market and they think, Christ, you know, I can't afford the private rented sector. I haven't had a rent increase for many years. I'm priced out. There's no social housing, and it's those people, and I've been doing articles on BBC as recently as last week about families that are having to move into temporary accommodation because landlords are selling. There isn't any alternative that are there. We need to not fall into the trap of thinking that actually, you know, as part of our assault on the private rented sector, that somehow temporary accommodation is a better option. We need to, with these regulations, we need to back the private rented sector, and we need to let the investor thrive.
I think we do. Temporary accommodation is massive pressure for councils. It's just, there are no words to express how hard it is for a council to deal with that. Chair, back to you.
Thank you. I'm sure the unions, which I know are sat in the audience, would be reflecting on the comment around your right to a home. And I think it just means it's just the context of it being an essential service, and obviously the context of people being able to.
I know what it means.
Yeah, kind of make profit off that rather than it. Just make that statement.
Chair, it isn't only about profit; it's about cost to us. Imagine we pushed all the private landlords out, fine, then we don't have to pay. Where's that money coming from?
And that's exactly my next question. I was going to say to Karen, I think it was really interesting what you were saying about acquisitions, and just to be really explicit, would it be helpful to have more funding to do that, and therefore what scale, the gap between the current funding you've got now and the potential for those more homes that you could buy back, just to give a sense of what that kind of gap is currently?
I think Dan here, as the London Council's rep, could probably speak for London. Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, and the GLA are open to us going back if we've purchased 120 out of the 200. So you can go back and have a second conversation with them about, you know, we have to have the money in order to match fund theirs. So we can go back. That conversation is always available to say that we think we can do another 50 or another 100, and other local authorities maybe won't be at the same pace as us, so they're handing money back. So that conversation is always there, but it is around the sort of envelope that's currently available. But I mean, if you're buying homes, obviously you can buy homes a lot quicker than you can build them, albeit they're second hand. So they do come with sort of potential repair issues or ongoing sort of block issues. You're inheriting the block issues, and that's another property that you've got to manage within the block. So, I mean, I would always say that local authorities, are able to sort of have those conversations with the GLA and do have them with them around how we could scale up supply locally.
Yeah, Chair,
just let Dan come in a minute.
I was just going to add two very quick things. Firstly, that as well as the GLA scheme, there's also the Local Authority Housing Fund. I think I've got that right, which is money that's coming now direct from government, specifically to support acquisitions for TA and for housing for refugees. And so there is a kind of growing acknowledgement already in the system, as it were, that funding for councils to acquire homes and not, as it were, principally targeted as social rent, at least in the short to medium term, is already a growing part of the picture. And I think kind of we are building our capacity and always open to conversation about more funding for that. I guess the other thing I'd say, at risk of making the boring point about whole systems again, is that if we accept that the two things that drive up costs of rent are the rising cost to a landlord of providing the service and the kind of basic economic laws of supply and demand, where the bigger the gap between those is, the bigger the rents rise. It does seem, and when we think about the challenge that the government's got in meeting its targets for house building in a world where demand for market sale has gone pretty soggy, large-scale investment in building to rent and increasing the supply there has got to be part of the picture, because that will also tend to be backed by institutional investors who will be better equipped to meet their obligations as landlords or to work with managers who are better equipped to meet their obligations as landlords. So thinking about kind of new supply of new build rent is part of this system as well.
Yeah, we won't get too much into that, because I do have a view that, there is evidence that build to rent also pushes up the price of rent within an area. And obviously the comments that were made in this panel and the previous panel was all around renters not being able to kind of afford to buy because they can't afford to, get the deposits and stuff together. I don't know where to go to. I might go to Ben quickly and then come back to you.
Very quickly. Welcome those steps. I mean, it does kind of increase prices, though. That's something to bear in mind. And the other thing that it does is it masks the problem, because all you're doing is you're shifting the property from the private rented sector to the social sector without adding to the net supply of housing. So rather than pontificating about an investment strategy, why not just back responsible landlords? Why not stop them from exiting the sector in the first place? Why not prevent people from moving into temporary accommodation? That's exactly where we should be looking.
And I think lots of us agree on that, and that's why we're really interested with lots of the mechanisms within the Renters' Rights Act to very much do that. Like, let's get renting more kind of secure for everybody. But and we've discussed kind of wider points here, and we obviously, I'm chairing in a very cross-party position because we all have very different views here on a lot of the things that have come up. So I'm trying my very best to be the chair. Last question from Assembly Member Lloyd Bailey.
First and foremost, Chair, you have done very well. The panel might not be aware of the exchanges we've had in private about some of these things. What I want to talk to is about local authorities, about you purchase this property, what about the revenue burden it then becomes because you have to maintain it, etc., etc. Who covers that risk, or are the council just prepared to take it on? Because ultimately that's cheaper than having to provide social temporary accommodation.
So whenever you're making a decision to buy, you're doing a basic viability assessment, which is, can I cover the cost of this to me? And that's usually a combination of three factors: the cost of servicing any borrowing you've had to make the acquisition in the first place, the cost of the kind of everyday management and maintenance, and the cost of the kind of long-term investment over a long-term maintenance cycle to maintain it at good standards. And if your income from rent is not going to cover those costs, then it's not a viable acquisition. The reason the grants are helpful is that an injection of cash from outside can move an acquisition from being non-viable to making it viable by reducing the borrowing element of that potentially to zero in order to make the numbers add up. But no authority buying into either its housing revenue account or its general fund, particularly in the current environment, would make an acquisition where those fundamental viability calculations weren't positive, neutral or positive.
Thank you. It's very clear. Thank you.
Brilliant. That brings us to the end of our discussion. We just have a couple minutes, a couple bits of short business to do, but thank you so much for your time and for your insights. As we've said, you're welcome to submit further written evidence to us, and we may have some follow-up questions. So just to the committee, can you note the report and today's discussion?
Noted.
Can you also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with group party leads to agree any output arising from the discussion?
Agreed.
Can we note the committee's work programme?
Noted.
And the next meeting of the committee is scheduled for the 9th of February 2026 at 2 p.m. in the Chamber, City Hall. I have no urgent business, so I declare the meeting closed.